Good evening and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm your host, Kevin Castley. Tonight I'm sitting down with Carl Fluri for a friendly debate. This one's probably not going to be as heated as some of them tend to be. We're going to be talking about interventionism and everything, but Carl's here tonight and I appreciate him coming on. It's late where I am. It's much later where he is. And so, but we're going to be debating. With that, basically, if you could kind of introduce yourself to the audience and everything, and then you get the opportunity to make your opening statements.
All right, sounds good. Well, thanks for having me on the channel. Just want to introduce myself. My name's Carl. I run the Chance of Flurry show. I also contribute with the National Telegraph here in Canada. I'm a Canadian. I lean right, obviously I lean right. But I would say that I'm libertarian-minded, although not quite there. So I would put myself more into like a classical liberal category. Essentially my view on interventionism would be just following, just war theory, just the tradition that we tend to follow. I would also question some of the information that is put out by the various states or the various actors in these conflicts. And so essentially, I mean, there are some signs. Obviously, if you look at the Iraq War, that was a clear sign of misinformation by the U.S. state. There's also some documents recently that show that the U.K. engages in funding media outlets who engages in subversion of Russian state and Russian state actors in certain parts of the world. They engage in misinformation campaigns on behalf of NATO. Which, I mean, I understand, seeing as how we can justify that based on the fact that Russia engages in the same kind of practices all around the world as well. And so, I mean, I get that someone has to combat the narrative, but it's just about who can you trust in this side, and are you actively looking at all sides when trying to follow the just war theory?
Okay. Yeah, so my view of it is a little bit different than that. I do think that you're right to point out, and I'll credit you there for pointing out. The Russians also do disinformation and everything. It's not the case that in every justification behind wars that have been conducted by Western powers that there was 100% correct information that was given to the public in justification for it. Sometimes it's due to information asymmetry. Sometimes you think that something's a bigger threat than it really is and whatnot. Sometimes you don't have, hard evidence necessarily, but that there's the possibility that there's a substantial threat that exists. I will say one thing where I think on that there might be some bit of difference is that for me, it kind of goes back to, Leo Strauss' conception of the noble lie, that there is this idea that, if people, if they downplay or if they don't value, security enough, at some point you need to sell people on something. And if people are more prone to say an issue of weapons of mass destruction, for example, in the case of Iraq, where we did know that Saddam had chemical weapons. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot of the media, you could say,
the claims were that he was manufacturing and storing chemical weapons at the time. When we went into war with Iraq, he was actively engaged with the UN in dismantling his weapons manufacturing.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing is he had precursors for chemical weapons that were there and would easily be reassemblable. You can say, oh, well, he's complying with the UN or whatnot. We know he used them against his own people in the Anfal campaign, for example. So he's somebody who had a demonstrated record of committing genocide with weapons of mass destruction. But in the American media, there was this idea, and it's not even so much that Colin Powell or anybody in the administration directly said, oh, they might have nukes, but a lot of people interpreted it as they might have nukes.
Well, yeah, because they said that they were getting uranium from Africa, which wasn't true, and that they were getting these aluminum products for building centrifuges, which were shown to be the wrong products, that they would have to be remanufactured if they were ever to be used in a centrifuge, and that the U.S.'s own intelligence agencies confirmed was most likely being used for artillery shells rather than any type of centrifuge.
Right, but there's a difference between the information that you have available at the time. It goes back to that old Rumsfeld line about known knowns and known unknowns and whatnot. Additionally, we know that for a fact that he was trying to get nuclear weapons, and it took an Israeli strike against the Osirak reactor to actually shut down his initial program. So this was a guy who had nuclear ambitions. He obviously not only possessed chemical weapons, which is in violation of numerous treaties, but he also used them, which is infinitely worse against his own people. And so at that point, if the media in the United States was running with, oh, he might have nukes or something, that's a little bit, or he might be trying to get nukes. That's a little bit outside what the administration was saying, but I don't actually necessarily have an issue with that necessarily, because if it takes people thinking somebody might have nukes to care about an issue, well, I care about the consequence, and the consequence is that Iraq is free and Saddam is dead. And so at the end of the day, that was
how is Iraq better off today
than under Saddam?
Right.
Okay, well, simple. Okay, so this is a few-pronged answer, but I think it's a decent question, because a lot of people would ask that. And so it's kind of incumbent upon me as the advocate of the war to justify that. I would say, before the 2003 invasion, the Iraq regime under Saddam had a death toll between 2,500 and 3,500 deaths per month over the course of his tenure as dictator of Iraq. We're talking a long time. So the total death toll from the war itself, in terms of the actual liberation campaign, is nowhere near as high as the total death count in the war. Most of the deaths that resulted from what we think of as the Iraq War were due to the Iranian-sponsored insurgency. Coalition forces are responsible for, approximately 20,000 deaths, roughly. In other words, 6 months of a typical year under Saddam being in power. So the Iraqi people were objectively better off as a result of that, because
although if you launch a war, wouldn't you be responsible for what comes after that war? Like if there are civilian casualties from the war, wouldn't the person who launched the war be the one responsible?
I disagree with that. I believe that if you have the capacity to intervene and you refuse to do so, that you are morally culpable in the results thereof. In other words, action is action, and inaction is also action. And so to stand by as a bystander, to bear witness to genocide, because again, we have to remember that there were, Christopher Hitchens famously, under his doctrine, addressed 4 key points under which Saddam had forfeited his sovereignty, and in which any dictator would forfeit their sovereignty. The first is he violated the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is a fact. We know that he was trying to get nuclear weapons, and if it wasn't for the state of Israel, he probably would have got them. And second, he played host to terrorists, international terrorists. That also violates somebody's sovereignty. I'm not one of those people who thinks like, oh, sovereignty is just a myth or whatever. I think that there are sovereign countries out there. I think you can be a sovereign country, and you can have sovereign country that has political disagreements. It doesn't mean that we have to go to war or anything. Like, I don't like what France is doing a lot of the time, but they're still a sovereign country. But he additionally...
so when is that line crossed? When do they stop becoming a sovereign country?
Yeah, so I'm just going through Hitchens' doctrine right now. Mine's a little bit different, but he had 4 conditions. So those are 2 so far. First is Non-Proliferation Treaty. You try to get nukes, you forfeit your sovereignty. Second is the playing host or harboring terrorists. We know the Taliban, obviously, in that case, violated that as well. The third is committing genocide. That is obviously what Saddam did against the Kurdish population, for example, just within his own country. We know that he gassed, literally thousands of Kurds on the basis of their ethnicity. And the fourth is conducting wars of aggression. Now, he did 2 wars of aggression, primary ones at least, against Kuwait and Iran, which the both stated official reason for was glory, oil, territory, and basically to dominate the region. And so in this case, we have a dictator who is not only a menace to his own people, and there are people that are relativists that could say, oh, well, that's their own culture or whatever. I would disagree with that argument, but he was actually a menace internationally as well, because of course he invaded Iran and he invaded Kuwait. And so we have, and not to mention he fired Scuds at Israel and whatnot. And so we can only speculate, but I think it's a fair speculation to say, well, if he averaged 2,500 to 3,500, depending on which estimate you go with over the course of his entirety of his regime, it would be fair to say he was probably going to average likewise if he were to stay in power another 30 years. In other words, if we were to keep him in power until today, instead of 20,000 Iraqis dying in the liberation campaign as a result of collateral damage as well as strikes against combatant forces, we instead would have that death toll repeated in the alternate timeline in which we didn't go into Iraq. Within 6 months, we'd have the equal kill count, except people would still be living in misery over there, and people would still be either, and again, maybe Saddam dies at some point. We know his sons take over, and then it arguably that, very well arguably, that average death toll would have gone up, actually. I mean, those guys were insane. But additionally, we know that in the case of Iraq, even if you don't even care about the people on the ground in the country, the fact that he posed such an international menace in terms of his nuclear ambitions as well as his conventional invasions against his neighbors, it was something that to let that slide would essentially say, we have no standards whatsoever, and we yield the world to the forces of darkness. That's what that would be tantamount to. So I think it made my case fairly well for the Iraq War. So.
Okay, but that wasn't the case that was made to justify the war, right?
Oh, I would argue that's essentially...
There was no evidence presented that shows that he was getting nuclear armaments. They also suggested that he was stockpiling both biological weapons and chemical weapons, which was never demonstrated factually either. The UN argued that they didn't have the authority to actually go to war. France didn't participate in their ultimatum that was given to Iraq. So I don't see where they had even legitimate authority, which is part of the just war theory, right? It's one of the
I don't
principles.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to the just war theory. I think of myself.
Well, I mean, so you don't subscribe to even the regulations around conduct either. So use of chemical weapons, use of nuclear weapons, you would be okay with in certain scenarios in war then?
Well, I actually debated Dylan Burns, for example, back in November, arguing that in the case of North Korea, we know that any sort of incursion there to remove the regime from power before they blackmail America with nukes to take the South would necessarily precipitate a nuclear retaliation on their part. And I've argued that in order to guarantee minimization of chances that any of their strategic assets get off the ground, I've supported a preemptive nuclear strike against North Korea, for example. Obviously not targeting civilian population centers, targeting their buried facilities and their world mobile nuclear missiles, for example. I think that it's very clear that in a nuclear war, which is inevitable in the case of the Korean Peninsula, you want to be the first to fire. You don't want to be on the receiving end. And so, but to get back to your question about the just war theory, I don't subscribe to it. I think of myself as somewhat in a gray area between a very unilateral liberal hawk and a more liberal neoconservative. So I believe in American exceptionalism. I believe in unilateral action. It's not to say I don't welcome allies, but I can't have them watering down the resolve. And so you mentioned France, for example. France has a history of actually abetting the Saddam regime. They passed along yellow cake, as well as they were in the process of shipping over other nuclear aids, potential fissile material. And it took the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, it took them blowing up a freighter in the port of Marseille to stop that. So France wasn't going to get involved. There's this meme out there that the largest arms suppliers of, or the largest arms supplier of Saddam was the United States, but it's factually untrue. Almost all of his armaments came from either the Soviet Union or the French Republic. And I've argued in the past before that with allies like France, who needs enemies? So even though I do regard France to have legitimate sovereignty, they are a democracy. I would say they're one of the weakest links in the West, and they have a history of double-crossing us, I would say. I don't hold them in the same regard, for example, that I hold the United Kingdom, for example. So,
okay, and so what are your thoughts on, let's say Pakistan, China, India.
Okay. Well, I do want to try to answer your question though about the legitimacy of it though, because
Right.
I don't personally value the United Nations. The United Nations has been since its conception in 45 a compromise between good and evil, good being the West, evil being the Soviets and their bloc. The only exception was the Korean War when they actually were muscular, but that was because the Soviets had, fortunately enough, boycotted it because they were butthurt over America and everything. And that allowed the UN to actually act kind of like NATO. So I'm a big supporter of NATO. I think NATO should be enlarging. I think the Western Hemisphere should be enlarging, but I don't think that the UN has proven itself to be a very legitimate force for determining what's moral or what's immoral in terms of international affairs and conduct thereof.
And so who decides that?
Well, the Vanguard of Liberty, which is the United States, and ideally we could have
unilaterally decides what is just for the entire world.
Well, we know that of the major superpowers that have the capacity to actually forge the world in their image, we have three that are viable right now. You have Russia, you have China, Communist China, and you have the United States. The United States isn't perfect, but human interests most closely correspond by orders of magnitude to America's interests. And so when America acts in our interests, that is something to bring about the betterment of humanity. Do
you believe that human interest is unilateral throughout the world?
I'm a moral universalist, so I believe that what's good in Montana is good in Pakistan and whatnot.
What if the people don't want it?
That's the thing, is that if the people are represented by a dictator that claims to speak for them, such as in China, then of course the party's going to say that people don't want democracy or they can't handle democracy. But it's clear that democracy is the best, because we can look at the exact same ethnicity, the exact same race in Taiwan, and see that they make 6 times as much as the people enslaved in the communist mainland.
So. But people don't always want to see that, right? People don't always look for the best economy. That's not necessarily what's most important to every society, right? Which is why, there have been democracies built up in the Middle East that were based more in Western thought. And then those same democracies were rejected by the populace at large, who then installed a more autocratic, more religious dictator afterward, because as a backlash to what was seen as like a Western presence in their nation.
So can you go into a couple specific countries? I'm not saying that you're incorrect about that. I know you could say, well, Hamas was democratically elected, that kind of stuff. It's like,
well, what happened to Iran?
Well, Mossadegh wasn't exactly democratic. He tried to hold on to power, and the British went in and
right. So this is what I'm saying, though, is like when the U.S. goes in and takes out a dictator, what is the solution? You're not going to hold a democratic election.
Nation building. I think there needs to be a transitionary process to de-Baathify or de-Islamismify. I'm not saying but
usually that involves propping up a certain candidate in the region that has Western interests, right?
Yeah, so I'm a fan of the Shah, for example. I'm not somebody who believes
that these people are generally rejected by the population at large eventually, because they were installed by your regime, not by the people.
But that's not really true. If you look in the case of Iran, for example, the populace despises the mullahs. They despise the Ayatollah regime. There is a somewhat popular support for the Shah, and there's a big support for democracy in Iran, for example. And this is evidenced by when they've done, and this is a regime where you can be executed if you speak out against the government. They've done these displays for public relations where they'll have the people trample on the flags of Israel and the United States, and most of the people will, in defiance to the Ayatollah, they will walk around the flags and go about their day. And then that's an act that can get you executed over there. It's very clear that, if we want to talk about Iran, for example, both the people want democracy as well as the people did better under the Shah. The reason why the Ayatollah was able to come to power wasn't so much that he had this popular mandate of the Iranian people or anything. It was that the West let this group of thugs take over. Basically, we didn't do anywhere near enough to support the Shah when it mattered, and that's a lesson for history, unfortunately. But
right, but I mean, if you have to constantly stay there and back the government so that they can remain in power, is that really a democratic government ever?
Well, I'm not arguing.
So are you installing democracy or liberalism in any of these nations that you're building?
Well, I'm not arguing that the Shah was a Democrat, but he was a progressive force in terms of modernizing Iran and actually giving people some degree of rights and autonomy over their own lives. Again, I'm not somebody who thinks you could make certain countries, like, for example, if we made Saudi Arabia a democracy right now, the Wahhabi clerics would win and the royals would be thrown out and they'd become basically like ISIS. They're legitimately not ready for democracy because they've been subject to decades of propaganda by these radicals that the royals have had to put up with because that's the social contract. They let them do their propaganda as long as they don't do a revolution and they get to stay in power. So I'm not somebody who believes you can immediately turn certain countries into democracies. We can look at Japan and Germany, for example. The US still has a presence in both countries, for example. Now, you could argue they'd be sustainable democracies if the US wasn't there, but you couldn't necessarily argue that in 45. There is some degree of time that it takes to get to a healthy point, but nothing worthwhile is easy to fight for, right? And the fighting doesn't stop once the war is over. That's when the hard work of nation building begins, and the West has had a big problem of staying the course. People talk about how the United States has an issue with that. France has a way worse problem with that. We can look at how they went into Libya and then they immediately went out. Now, Obama did the same thing as well. I'm not a fan of Obama, but I do believe that even if you didn't care about the people on the ground, even if you only cared about your own national interests, I genuinely believe that the whole world, or at least, more of the world, being countries that are amicable to your ideology, your economics, your, I guess, cultural hegemony, is better than having them be in line with the Kremlin or with Beijing, because we want Western hegemony over the world. That's what I aim for at this channel and everything, is to end the guilt that we have in the West, to make us stop seeing ourselves as maybe we're the bad guys and say, you know what, relativism is cancer. Not only are we the good guys, but we should help out our fellow men and women who were unfortunate enough to be born in, say, North Korea, born in Iran, born in Syria, born in Russia, born under communism, that sort of thing. So that's my view.
Well, I'd agree with you if there was a large presence demonstrated within the country with a unified want or desire for liberalism or democracy. Then I would say, yeah, I mean, if there's a revolution happening, a democratic revolution, then yeah, we support that in any tyrannical regime. But to go in and just take out a regime without a backup plan, which is essentially what the U.S. did in Iraq, will never lead to a stable nation.
Well, you mentioned Iran. In 2011, there was an uprising of people that demanded democracy, and they were put down, and Obama stood by and didn't do anything. And I've mentioned how the Iranian people are very pro-democracy at large, but obviously they are under the yoke of the Ayatollahs. And so they've demonstrated a very transparent commitment that they want to be free. And it's in our court now at this point as to what we're going to do. Now, that's the case of Iran. North Korea is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the people there would be better off under democracy. However, there are a lot of true believers that don't know any better. They've been cut off from the world for so many decades that they're brainwashed. Some of them, they do want democracy, but they can't say anything because their family would report on them, for example, to the secret police. And others, they have Stockholm syndrome. In that case, I also believe it's incumbent upon us to liberate that country. And that's for humanitarian reasons, though I will say I don't make the humanitarian case with North Korea, because for them, their regime is so much of a grave and existential threat to us now in terms of their nuclear arsenal that the humanitarian case was long over. A lot of people are going to die in that war. That's about saving ourselves from nuclear annihilation. That's not about liberating the people of North Korea, unfortunately. Though that would, for the survivors, that would be a consequence of that. They would have a better world to grow up in and their kids to grow up in as part of South Korea. So,
do you not think that North Korea would retaliate, or that, I mean, they might have allies that would retaliate if you were to launch a preemptive nuclear strike?
China would not agree to lose all of their cities and everything and all their bases to save North Korea. They send 1.5 million young guys to die for North Korea back in the 50s. After the Sino-Soviet split, North Korea has always been closer to Russia. They've always had animosity ever since the 60s, basically. And there was a time, 10 years ago, the North Koreans lost some submarines. They radioed Beijing to ask for help. And Beijing said, you guys pulled your dudes from the embassy. You find them yourselves. Like, they're not the best of allies. So China wouldn't do anything if the U.S. went in. They would say, well, this sucks. We got American troops on our border, but at least we don't have to deal with that Kim dude anymore. Now, it would still be a net negative for them. That's why they don't help us, because they still prefer Kim. But even then, they would say, well, this sucks, but at least Kim's gone. They're not even the biggest fans. Russia is a lot closer with North Korea, but Vladimir Putin cares about his swag Mercedes, his yacht, and his Swiss bank accounts, and he's not going to get vaporized to save some dude that's south of him in North Korea. So he'd say, tough luck, kid. You should have been Russia. That's what he would have said. So there'd be harsh words from the UN, and I know the Germans and the French would be super concerned and stuff. We get away with it, and the world would be a better place, and America would be stronger in the world for sure. So,
and you don't care about what is likely to be like hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people you kill?
Well, if we let the regime continue to do what it's going to do, which is build up a certain number, I've argued a little more than 1,000 nuclear weapons, to the point that they can blackmail the United States and say, look, we're going into the South. We're going to take them and force them under communism. You're not going to do anything about it. You're going to surrender your 30,000 troops that you got there to us. Otherwise, you lose all your cities. Even John Bolton at that point is like, we're probably not going to retaliate, so you're probably going to get away with that, but that kind of sucks. And if I was in charge earlier, we could have done something. North Korea takes the South, and people say, well, the South has stronger military than the North. That's technically true, but they don't have the morale to wear that initial artillery barrage. And once they find out that Washington doesn't have their back, they surrender within 48 hours. And so now you've got a few tens of thousands of dead South Koreans from the initial bombardment to pummel the regime or the democracy into submission. We know that Moon Jae-in would immediately surrender and say, we're joining our brothers in the North. Let's be trad communists, bro. And then as far as all the tens of millions of South Koreans for the rest of time, we're talking centuries, millennium, that would be born, die in concentration camps, be shot for stealing a piece of corn in a gulag, this sort of thing. The intergenerational magnitude of suffering and death would number potentially in the tens of millions over the next 10,000 years that would die under the Kim regime, versus a few 100,000 people to liberate it. Like the place for
right now, you're
is really clear.
Hard speculation, right? And you're justifying nuking a country over what is speculation at the end of the day.
Well, we know that they had 0 nuclear weapons in 2005. They have upwards of 100 today. They keep on producing more and more. We know that their ICBM capacity went from 0 in 2005. Their longest range thing could basically only hit Alaska. I'm going to bring up just a picture just to make it clear, because I do have this in the roll right now. This is the largest, most powerful ICBM in the world right now. This is what they released a few months ago. That's back in October. That's an 11-axle launcher right there. Those things can hit well past Florida, and they're going to be armed with thermonuclear weapons. And so the problem that we reach is that they seek those not so much as a deterrent. They already have a nuclear deterrent. They seek these as a means to blackmail. This is what John Bolton talks about. They seek those as a means to blackmail the United States into letting them take the South. They're going to make.
How do you know that?
Well, that's my view. I've studied them for over 15 years now. And John Bolton doesn't say this exactly. This is my own speculation, but I am 100% convinced that this is a regime that will only conduct this blackmail once they're 100% confident that it will work. They can't do that right now. They're not going to do it with 100.
You can't use this theory that you have that they may build up their nuclear arsenal in order to blackmail the U.S. so that they can take the South, to justify preemptively nuking a country. That they haven't shown any sign that that's actually what they're looking to do. Like
let's
maybe if
say
we found evidence that that was some sort of plan that they had, then sure, go for it.
we do,
But
we do. So the regime has been on the record actually since 1950, well, before 1953, but since basically the end of the Korean War, they've been on the record as saying that they still seek the reunification with the South. They've been very clear about it. They've done many attempts actually at
who's to say they
already.
don't mean like a peaceful reunification?
Well, because they amass the fourth largest military in the world, and they
The U.S. has
regularly.
the first largest military in the world.
That's
So
good. I'm glad
yeah,
that
no,
you
I agree, but I'm just
regularly.
saying like that's not a reason to nuke a country, right? Because if that was, then we would have like the U.S. would have been nuked a long time ago. Like if somebody building up a large military means that you can justify nuking them, then how come no one has reason to nuke the U.S.?
Well, if I was Russia, I would 100% view the United States as an
Like
existential
what you're
threat
saying right
and
now
do
would
everything.
justify North Korea nuking the U.S. Like
Well,
if someone
no,
in power said what you were saying,
but North
it would
Korea is
justify them
not
nuking the
morally
U.S.
equivalent to the U.S. In other words, I understand that Kim feels scared. I understand why Kim does what he does. I do devil's advocate all the time. I not. I don't have sympathy for the devil. I do that to get inside his head and see what he's going to do. I actually don't care about his emotions. I want to vaporize his heart. I'm not concerned with how he actually feels. He's
Right,
my
but you don't
enemy.
understand
I want
that saying this emboldens your enemy, right? It
and well,
causes them to be even greater enemies, right? Because there is absolutely no way that they could reconcile with you at this point. You're
there
saying
can't
we
be.
preemptively nuke them.
No, but what you're missing though is that they've admitted time and time again, actually, to using negotiations and stuff in bad faith as a means to get aid and stuff and swag for the regime, and then say, haha, we tricked you. We weren't going to follow through on that. They've bragged about it. They are not a regime that we can negotiate in good faith. Now, is that true of every regime out there?
But just
No,
because you
I
can't
think it's
negotiate with
actually
them, does it mean
possible.
you annihilate them?
Well, no. The reason why North Korea is a bit different is, let's say we went in with conventional force. You know they're going to use their nuclear weapons, which would necessarily precipitate a nuclear response from us. Given that, why not do it first? Nuclear war favors the attacker because we know they're going to use their nukes. So how about we use ours to minimize the chances any of theirs get off the ground in the initial strike? And it would send a very clear message to the Russians, to Iran, to everybody else out there in the world that you actually mean business. It's not just strong rhetoric, that you just took out the Kim regime, which was this bulwark of resistance to the American order, and you just straight up said, oh, well, you're done. Like, so now you don't have to use nukes, mind you. I'm just telling you that they will use nukes, and then people are going to respond with nukes. So why not be the first to strike to try to reduce as many nukes as they have? Because obviously some of theirs are deeply buried and some of theirs are very mobile. And now if you could do it in a way that you could remove their nuclear arsenal with purely conventional means and guarantee that to the same extent, I would say you don't actually need to do a nuclear strike against them. But I have yet to be convinced that could work. But in either case, the arguments that you seem to be making, though, Carl, were that, well, they could just say, well, America's the aggressor here, so why can't we be the aggressor or whatever? The problem is I don't view the position of defense or the position of offense as having any moral worth. In other words, if Hitler's just defending himself versus if Hitler's the aggressor, to me, it doesn't matter because Hitler's a genocidal maniac, and I'm going to take him out before he can invade Poland rather than wait until he invades Poland. So for me, I'm concerned with the perpetuation of, human rights, democracy, the liberal order, and namely the Western security interests, because we can't help anybody else if we're not secure ourselves. North Korea and their nuclear menace poses an existential threat to us, where even if we say, okay, well, he doesn't actually want to nuke America, he just wants to blackmail America, for all we know, he might be rash one day and actually nuke America, in which case we just took a chance that he wasn't going to use them, and now he did use them, and now 150 million people are dead. That's something that I'm not willing to stand by and tolerate. And I would have said to Truman, if I had a time machine, it's like that meme, like, oh, if girls had a time machine, they go back and see their grandma. It's like, if I had a time machine, I go back and tell Harry Truman, look, man, you want to nuke the Soviets before they get nuclear weapons because the world's going to be complete and total mess for hundreds of years. But you can forge world peace by the year 1980 by removing communism and stopping the Korean War and China and everything before it even starts. Just take out Stalin before he gets nukes in 49, bro. And my hope is that Truman would say, yeah, bro.
Would lead those people to be friendly towards you in the aftermath?
What's that?
Do you believe that nuking a nation would lead the citizens, the people of that nation, to be friendly towards you in the aftermath?
Well, where are all the anti-American Japanese terrorist brigades? Seems like they think America's cool and swaggy, and America nuked them. So,
I mean, Japan is very just pro-Japan essentially at this point. They're trying. They would rebuild the empire if they could.
I don't actually no.
Japanese supremacy in Japan is actually on the rise.
Oh, for sure. Like, there's a lot of racism and stuff directed towards other groups. But you ask the Japanese people, what do they think of America? They think America is pretty cool. They think America is pretty cool. They don't hate America for nuking Hiroshima. That a lot of Japanese people hate the imperial regime. They might want there are Pan-Asianists in Japan that still want hegemony over Asia, but they like their rights, they like their economy, they like their freedoms, and they like their government the way they have it now. They wouldn't bring back
they grew into a pretty powerful and successful democracy.
Yeah. And they like America, and yet America nuked them. So it seems to me that you'd have a Russia. No, but you'd have a Russia.
In North Korea, you have a people who are subjugated to constant propaganda, who, as you said, many of them favor the state. So if you were to nuke the state, what becomes of these people?
Well, with the survivors from the war, we'd have a 30, 40-year period of de-radicalization. It would take a lot longer than in Germany because some of these people think that Kim can read their mind and stuff. It would take a
stop these people from attempting to, install a new regime.
It's possible, but that new regime wouldn't have all these nukes to threaten us with. Again, this is about our security. So, because I care about us first and foremost, right? So, and our hegemony in the world.
And so you believe that North Korea is more likely to use its nukes than Russia or Pakistan is to use their nukes, and China, for example.
Well, North Korea is more likely to blackmail America directly to get the South or to get land than Russia or say China are. In the case of Russia,
China has 17 border disputes currently, and they are also engaging in blackmail of other states. For example, Canadian citizens have been kidnapped.
Oh, no, I'm aware of that. I just don't see China saying, oh, we're going to nuke America if you don't let us take Taiwan. I don't see that happening until they get a lot more nukes. North Korea is aiming for getting way more nukes than China. They already have a third as many as China. China doesn't actually have that many nukes. As far as Russia, it's the reverse.
China's military is far larger.
Okay, but China would get defeated in a war. Their military is larger. They know that they would lose to America. Their tech sucks. They have copies.
There is an alliance that would form. I mean, we've seen it with the Axis before. China would not be alone in a war.
Putin wouldn't risk getting vaporized to save a guy in China that he doesn't even really like that much. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I've argued that we will have a third world war later in this century. I want us to be on
because they perceive the world the same way you perceive the world, right? Like if the U.S. for Russia, if the U.S. comes in and takes out China, and now they hold, control over China, that doesn't serve Russian interests any more than Xi does it?
Oh, no, absolutely not. But getting nuked doesn't either. And Putin knows if he were to nuke America, then that would be signing his death warrant. So he would.
If you've got numerous countries such as, North Korea, China, Russia in an alliance who suggest that they would nuke the United States, then they would. Why not?
China and North Korea don't get along very well, and China would not lose everything to save North Korea. Russia would be a better case for that. And even Russia wouldn't do it because Putin's a nihilist.
It's not only to save each other, right? You understand that it's to stop American hegemony the way you want it. These nations fight against you.
Right. So then why didn't Russia nuke America in the Iraq war? Because they said, hey, man, don't invade Iraq. And George H.W. Bush listened and said, OK, we won't. We'll just kick him out of Kuwait. But then his son came in. They're like, don't do it. Don't do it. We'll veto it at the UN. And George Bush is like, okay, we're going to go in. And then he's like, what are you going to do about it? And Russia's like, oh man, that's scary. We don't want a war. So Russia gets put in their corner. Russia would get put
But
in
at the
their
time,
corner.
Russia was smaller than they are now, and China was significantly smaller than they are.
Right. Yeah, but China's on the up and up. China's not going to screw over everything in their ambitions to save North Korea. They don't even like North Korea that much. They just see it as a lesser evil than U.S. troops on their border. But again, they're not going to lose their civilization to prevent that. North Korea would actually
like,
be
you
on
could see
their own.
why Russia might have been more timid right after the fall of the Soviet Union, right?
Oh, for sure. But they're actually in a worse position, arguably, now in terms of their demographic decline than they were even in 2004, 2005. I mean, that the high point for Russia under Putin in terms of their strength was arguably back in like 2013. I mean, they've had significant economic downturn since then. Now, all that they really have is this fading military that they've been.
Although America is getting a significant economic downturn now as well, right?
But America has the best military equipment in the world and the biggest economy in the world and the best innovation. So even if America goes into a downturn, America is still the top dog. Whereas when Russia does it, that's like they're nearing demographic death, right?
Right.
And
But like as I said, right, these nations would generally band together if you attempt to take out one, because it's a geopolitical position for your American hegemony to spread within the East, right? That it's within these nations' interests to get you the fuck out.
Right, but if you straight up went in, mask off with nukes initially, they're not going to go into that. Maybe if it's a conventional war and you do a conventional incursion, you could argue maybe there would be a conventional response from Russia and China. If they see you straight up mean 100% business, again, Putin's not going to sign his death warrant because he's an atheist, right? Like there's nothing after him in his view. He just wants his money, his bank account.
But in their view, okay, you take out North Korea, what's to stop you from taking them whenever you want, right?
8,000 nukes. Like Russia is a bit different than North Korea. Russia is a status quo nuclear power, and I don't like that they've got 8,000 nukes. But and when I say I accept that they have them, I'm not saying I like it or I'm saying it's okay. What I'm saying is I'm not going to invade them because they've got that many nukes. In other words, they've made it. North Korea is trying to get there. They're trying to get a few thousand. It's intolerable. It's bad enough having Russia there. But the fact of the matter is we can't just straight up invade Russia. You could if you wanted to get hundreds of millions of people killed. It's true. Putin knows we can't invade him. Putin has security in his borders from an invasion. So he knows that even if America took North Korea, America's not, like, if I'm the president of the United States and I do this, I'm not going into Russia. Putin knows that because he's got 8,000 nukes. The fact of the matter is we need to deal with Russia with oil. We need to drill big in Canada. We need to drill big in Texas and Alaska so that we can get Europe off of their dependence on Russian oil and gas. We need to ship gas over there too. And I argued that Canada could be pivotal in this. That would undermine Putin, and we could bring about a bankruptcy of the Russian system. We can't do war with them. Putin knows we can't. Putin has security in his sovereignty as far as it relates to military, conventional, and nuclear forces. We both subvert each other and stuff covertly, but he knows we can't invade him. Even John Bolton, even I am not going to invade him. Like the Hawks of the Hawks aren't going to invade him, and he's not going to invade America directly. And it's simply the 8,000 nukes on both sides that keep that equilibrium. We can't let North Korea get there because one, it was bad enough letting Russia do it, and two, North Korea very clearly has the ambition to take the South. And once they do that, like you could say it's just a hypothetical. Let's say I'm right and I come back in 20 years and I say I told you. Well, they have the South now. And now that means that all the countries in NATO realize that America won't defend you if your aggressor has nuclear weapons. So they all call up Russia and they say, hey, Vlad, what can we do? Like in Estonia and Germany and stuff, they say, what can we do so that you won't.
It's not that we won't defend them. We defend them if an incursion ever occurs. But the thing is that you're speculating that it will occur, and there's no evidence to show that they're planning any type of attack on the South, and so you're just doing this with no provocation.
But they've attacked the South. They sunk a Southern naval vessel and killed, 100 soldiers back in 2010, for example. Now, you can say that's not a full-scale invasion, but we know they're building up the nukes. We can read all the signs, and we don't. I'm not of the view. I'm not of the view that I need.
We can't attack Russia, and that their borders are secure because of their nuclear arsenal. So why would why would North Korea not want the same? Why is that not?
Oh, no. I understand why Kim wants it. No. If I was Kim, I would straight up be doing the same thing that Kim is doing. I've called Kim a genius. A lot of people call Kim dumb. They're like, he's a big meme. I'm like, no. His dad was one of the smartest leaders that ruled in the last 100 years. Kim Jong-il was a political genius. He was like the Machiavelli of our era. He was Saddam similarly, but Kim Jong-il was an incredibly smart dude. He couldn't talk. He was just incapable of speaking. But he was a smart-minded. If you study Kim Jong-il, you know that dude 100%. He was a winner by the metrics of dictators. So he died of natural causes, and he got win after win, and he managed to get wins from Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton got nothing in return because Kim Jong-il went back on it. And he did the same thing under Bush, and then he did the same thing under Obama. And his son has learned from this. And his son is smart. And people can say he's dumb and fat. No, he's fat, but he's also smart. He's a very smart dude. He knows what he's doing. That's why he's killed his own family members, because he doesn't want any potential rivals to the Kim name messing with him. That was a smart move. Now, it's grotesque. It's cruel. Right. But I get why he did what he did. Kim Jong-un, rather, is an incredibly smart dictator, and he's doing everything that he should be doing. Here, like if you're the leader of North Korea, my advice to you, my impartial advice would be continue negotiations, do provocations when you've got a leader in America that's a bit more tough than you'd like. If you have a leader in America that's a bit more cozy or might be cozy, reach out to them, give the offer of concessions, always talk about peace. Continue to foster a dialogue with the South, but make sure that sometimes you'll just blow up dialogue buildings to prove that you are still tough. You do all this at the same time as it allows you to buy time so that you can build up your nuclear arsenal. Now, the key point in all of this is the nukes. And you now, Kim, have a tested yield of 225 kilotons. That's impressive, but it's not enough. You're going to need to get high-yield thermonuclear weapons, and you're going to need to test them. But you don't want to test them under somebody favorable like Trump, and you want to wait until you're 100% sure that it's going to be a big fizzle, or it's not going to be like a fizzle. It's going to actually work. So what you want to do is you want to spend a few years between each test so that you can 100% get the most data out of them as possible. Back in the old Cold War, Soviets in America did a lot of tests, and oftentimes they wouldn't get that much useful data because they were just rushing it to show off to each other. With North Korea, you don't have to do that. You just need to make sure you get there. Your goal is to get to about 1,800 nukes and a few hundred ICBMs so that you can guarantee that you could take out America so that they get the message to let you take the South. You do all this and you will win, and you will cuck this big superpower, and they will no longer be a superpower, and all the world will see them as a paper tiger, and you will win. That would be my advice to Kim. I 100% agree that Kim has, every motivation to do this. Now, here's the thing for me. That's me playing devil's advocate there. If you play devil's advocate your whole life, eventually you do become the devil. And for me, I play devil's advocate as an exercise to see what my enemy is thinking. But I have the fortitude and the moral conviction to step back and say, okay, but I am on the side of America. I'm on the side of Canada. I'm on the side of the liberal order. What do we do with this information? Oh, that's right. Well, I understand why he feels scared. I understand why he wants to be where Russia is. But he's our enemy, and we can't let him get there, and we have to destroy him, and we have to bury him. So that's my view. Like, again,
but
like
you're saying that, like, you're simultaneously saying, like, okay, look, I understand exactly what he's thinking and why he's doing what he's doing, but then you're saying he's also, though, doing what he's doing so that he can take the South. Yes. But if you understand that he's scared and that he's doing what he's doing in order to defend his own borders and have the same protection that Russia does, how does that make your claim that he's going to take the South justified?
Well, no, they've been on the record for a long time. In fact, they even invaded the South back in 1950, and so they're very clear that they want the South. Additionally,
that was 1950.
He's scared, but he's scared of America because he's scared of America doing to him what they did to Iraq. But here's the thing: North Korea doesn't necessarily need the biggest nukes, the biggest long range. So, for example, this one that I brought up here, he doesn't need this as a deterrent. All that he would need is short range nukes so that if America ever invaded him, he could destroy the American troops on the beaches and they'd be done. Kim actually has a deterrent against America right now. No American is going to invade North Korea if they just kept their arsenal the way it is here and just said, we don't want any more. We just want a minimal deterrence. The way that China does. China has like 300 and nobody invades them or whatever. The fact that Kim has broader ambitions, the fact that he's going for way more so that he can blackmail America, and the fact that he keeps blackmailing America, the fact that he's been very clear time and time again that he wants the South, that they've sunk South Korean vessels, that they've killed South Korean troops, that they maintain this vastly disproportionate army spending upwards of 50% of their GDP. If you look at ancillary sectors in the economy, 25% in pure spending on the military, which is the highest proportion anywhere in the world. It's very clear that he's not doing this to maintain a deterrent against America. He's building up a very modern and capable offensive capability to blackmail America and pummel the South into submission, because he knows that even though they have a more technologically advanced military than he does, he knows that he has will and they have weakness and they have Tulsi Gabbard but Korean form in the South, and that he would win. And so the thing is, I don't need him to go on TV and give a big speech and say, in 1 year, we are going to invade the South. He's not going to do that. I need to read his actions and infer what I think he's going to do. And to me, it's unconscionable for us to buy a few more years of peace at the cost of potentially millions of people dying. It's clear that war is inevitable. And at this point, again, it's not even so much about the humanitarian component. It's about saving ourselves, because if we're not secure, we can't save people in Syria. We can't save people in Cuba or elsewhere. North Korea is becoming an existential thorn in our side, and they have to be removed. And I can tell you this: if Kim were in Washington, he'd be doing the same thing if Biden was in Pyongyang. This is how politics is played at the world level. Now, I'm glad that America is the top dog because America has morality on our side. But if it were the case that, America was the good guy and where North Korea is, and North Korea was where America was, and the bad guy, well, America would just crush North Korea would just crush the good guy, and that would be that, because history doesn't actually care who's morally right or whatnot. It's, well, did they get nuked? Oh, they got nuked. Okay, they lost. So it's that sort of thing. It's why they why the Soviet Union survived versus why they could have been gone. It's why the Melians were they're not around anymore. That sort of thing. We have to understand that we can't look at them and say, oh, well, just because they're not invading the South immediately doesn't mean they don't have the intention to once they've got enough nukes to blackmail America, because we all know it would be suicide right now if they did it, because they don't have enough nukes to deter an American retaliation. They have enough nukes to deter an American invasion. America's not just going to invade a country with like 100 nukes out of nowhere.
But
that would be suicide.
Nuking them right now.
Yes, because we know that they're
aiming want to be able to deter the U.S. from using nuclear weapons. If they have enough nuclear facilities spread out far enough, then the U.S. would never be able to take out every target before they get off a retaliatory shot, right?
Oh, and I've made this point before too, that even right now, even with their relatively small arsenal right now, they're probably going to get off a few, and you might lose a couple assets in East Asia. Mm-hmm. That's better than waiting for them to do the war in 20 years where you're losing every city in America potentially. So again, it's about killing them over there before they kill us over here. It's as simple as that, honestly.
Yeah, but that's not justified.
No, it is justified.
No, because you don't have evidence that this is actually going to occur.
But you're just speculating that he's not going to do it, though.
Right, and I'm the one saying don't nuke people. You're saying, well, maybe he's going to march into the South, and instead of us waiting for him to march into the South and then maybe, doing something about it at that point, then what we're going to do is we're just going to say, no, okay, well, there's a possibility that you may march into the South, and so I'm going to nuke your country. Well, there's a possibility that China marches into all 17 nations with which they currently have border disputes. They have nuclear arsenals, just like North Korea currently has. So why are we not nuking China?
The problem is that with North Korea, they've proven every time and time again that they intend to blackmail the United States. They've done it in the past before. They'll do provocations, and then they'll get aid or whatever concessions, and then they'll say, haha, we weren't going to follow the terms, and they'll build up more nukes. They've sunk South Korean vessels. They invaded the South before. There's a very likely possibility that it's not just rhetoric, and they do intend at some point to take the South. And so let's say that I'm wrong and you're right, and we go in there and liberate the country and remove this great nuclear threat. But it turned out that Kim didn't actually plan to blackmail the U.S. He just wanted to be a butcher to his own people, but didn't want to take the South. Well, in that case, we don't have to deal with North Korea anymore. Now they become part of South Korea down the road, and the peninsula is free and prosperous for the rest of time. Now, let's say that you're wrong and I'm right, but we don't do anything and we wait. Well, now in 25 years, for example, they take the South. We lose maybe 10,000, 20,000 troops that were stationed there that are Western. And it shows the world that America won't actually come to your aid if you blackmail them with nukes. So now NATO falls apart, and those countries in Eastern Europe become Russian puppets now out of security because they know that America won't have their back anymore. In America, it would basically be like the Suez crisis, but at a bigger level. And so in that case, not to mention that the people of South Korea now have to live under communism for millions of years, basically. And so it would be the end of America as a superpower. And so, and that's in the best case scenario there, where they don't actually just wind up nuking America either by accident or out of rage one day. Because again, Kim is also unstable. He's smart, but he has his moments when you don't want that guy. Like Putin is not Kim. Putin's not really rash. Putin's always pretty calculated. I don't like Putin, but I trust him with nukes. I don't trust Kim with nukes, and I don't think that anybody should trust Kim with nukes. So that's my view of it. And I don't think we should trust his daughter. If he were to die and his daughter comes in, she's even more hardline than him. That could be a recipe for disaster. I don't like the fact that, you know, if I have kids one day, that they're going to be going to schools that they could be vaporized at any moment because there's a fat dictator 8,000 kilometers away that had a bad mood, and he just decided to launch out of nowhere. Or there was a miscalculation. He thought that America was going to respond or strike, but America wasn't. So he launches the nukes because he gets scared. He takes a ton of drugs. And then
wouldn't he be justified in being scared when people like you, or say, you know, John Bolton, who support, you know, aggression against North Korea, wouldn't he be justified in being scared and preemptively striking us? Like, we don't hear the same rhetoric come out of his mouth that you are spouting. He's not saying he's going to nuke America.
He said that he would turn Washington, and he's even released videos where, now granted, they're pretty poor graphics because North Korea doesn't have the best high-tech media experts, but where they straight up nuke the Capitol building and everything. And it's like, to me, yes, you could interpret it as, oh, he's just talking tough or whatever, or maybe they mean business. And again, I would go back to it and say, I think what you're doing, Carl, is you're drawing a false equivalence between America and North Korea. America's the good guy, North Korea's the bad guy. I'm not in the interest of looking out for colonists.
I agree. I agree with you. But what I'm saying is that your actions, right, are perceived by your enemies in certain ways and lead to certain actions by them. And so if you don't properly engage with your enemy, then in some ways you are responsible for their actions, because it's a foreseeable action that you will get nuked if you constantly go around saying, I'm going to nuke these guys.
Well, I'm not saying that the American president should say that he would nuke them. My argument is if say I was all of a sudden the American president right now, I'd actually have I'd offer a summit or something, kind of like how Trump did with the North Koreans, so that they're on low alert, so that they're not like immediately ready to go, and then I would strike them. I want them to be at the lowest state of readiness. But so that's one of the reasons why I think John Bolton. People say, well, even John Bolton doesn't say what you're saying. It's like, yeah, that's because he might be the national security advisor again. For me, I'm just there to try to boost support. Yeah, I'm trying to move the Overton window. I'm not saying that I think that Joe Biden should say, I'm going to nuke you, because if you're going to do it, don't tell them about it. Just do it. That's my view of it. So you're right that if you signal your intentions to the enemy, that it will definitely alert them and give them a higher state of readiness so that they can respond faster. That's true. But what I'm interested in doing here is changing public opinion and bolstering Western pride and confidence and everything. I'm not the American president. I'm not the national security advisor. For them, they shouldn't be saying that publicly. They should be saying that in private. We don't want to give Kim a heads up, but we do need.
What if our media constantly went around saying, oh, well, the government really should consider nuking this nation here?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like what I'm doing.
Is that justifiable? Because what if there was constant talks out of North Korea from their media units or from China saying oh yeah, we're considering the Chinese government should really consider nuking America.
Well, the North Koreans do that. Their state media often will release, I keep up with their state media quite frequently. They'll often release propaganda reels of them nuking DC or nuking San Francisco or nuking Florida, for example, nuking Mar-a-Lago. They do it all the time. I don't get this idea why we in the West have to look out for communist despots. I want him dead. I want his regime gone. So, and I'll do anything to garner support for that,
right? But what I'm saying is that it's not like the narrative that you're spouting is new, right? There are many people who have for decades said that we need to deal with North Korea in some way like this, right? And wouldn't that perpetuate the idea within North Korea and their leadership that they really need to ready themselves for this threat?
Well, but I want to take out the leadership. In other words, if I was in charge, the leadership would be 6 feet under, so it wouldn't matter what they were thinking; they'd be dead. So,
right. But what I'm saying is that these are the justifications for why they might want to build a nuclear arsenal of their own, right?
Well, they've got.
And so it's not necessarily that they want it so that they can then grow their nation and take charge of other bordering nations, because that would be significantly difficult for the regime that's currently in charge to persuade the people of South Korea to the same level that they've persuaded their own population. If you look at North Korea versus South Korea, from space, you can see that there's a giant difference between North Korea, which is significantly one of the darkest spots on the Earth, and then South Korea, which is lit up, from all the technology that we see there. It would be significantly difficult for Kim's regime to hold the same level of control over South Korea that he does over North Korea.
I disagree. They would do what the North Vietnamese did to South Vietnam. They'd just go in there, round up everybody that was associated with the capitalist class, kill them or put them in gulags. And with the rest of the people, they just force them into re-education camps. It'd actually be really easy. Once you have that territory, you could turn them into a communist hellhole really, really quickly, actually. And I would say
but the people there would resist you, and then they would have the backing of the entire United Nations at that time. There would be retaliation prior to anything occurring from North Korea.
Well, we know that if Kim were to do this, he'd probably have the consent of Putin the same way that his grandfather had the consent of Stalin back in the day, which means that the Russians would veto anything that the UN were to propose. The UN is largely feckless. I would say this. I got a question for you, though, Carl, which is, how many nukes are they allowed to have just to ensure their own security? In other words, what's the point when you would say, oh, maybe they are building this up as an offensive capability? Because I would argue they already have a minimal deterrence for defensiveness, just like China. Nobody's going to invade China because they got a few hundred nukes, but a few hundred isn't exactly an offensive capable amount against America. What's the level when you would start to get concerned that they might have greater ambitions than just protecting themselves?
I would say once they get close, or it appears that they're getting close to an equal playing field with the United States.
But once they're at that level and they're getting close, it's too late to do anything, and they'll get there, and then they'll nuke you. So I'm trying to nip it in the bud before we get hundreds of millions of people dying. I'd rather have hundreds of thousands of people.
But I think if they do get to the level where they're at the same, they're equally as bolstered as the United States, I think that's fine.
Wait, what?
I think that's fine. I think if they have the same number of nukes as the United States, that's okay. It doesn't show any level of aggression greater than the United States holding that same number of nukes.
Okay, that's a blatant false equivalence between America and North Korea. So in that case, North Korea then could immediately just take the South, and the United States would have to pull out. They could just say nuclear blackmail. And even if they didn't do that, you've then said, we will forever, for hundreds of thousands of years, say to our kids and their grandkids and their kids and their grandkids that as you go to work each day, as you go to the mall with your friends, as you go to school, as you go and visit your grandmother, in a care home or something, at any moment, a fat dictator who likes Katy Perry or his grandson or his daughter or whoever can wipe you out in a flash. How can we accept this? How can we not assert our hegemony?
Because as you've stated yourself, the U.S. can do the exact same to any other nation, right?
But I'm an American.
So why should anyone in any nation have to live under that, right? So shouldn't, by that logic, the U.S. disarm themselves of all the nukes that they have?
But America is the guardian of liberty. North Korea is the guardian of tyranny. But you understand that if you're starving in a North Korean gulag, it doesn't matter what race you are, where you were born, what culture or whatever. You can recognize you would be better off at a McDonald's in New Jersey, right? In other words, America is better. No. But so we're not better than Imperial Japan because we nuked Imperial Japan. Is that it? Like, I want to know whose side you're on.
If you nuke someone and you destroy, like, indiscriminately, an entire city of theirs, like their entire population. Well, that's what happened in Japan, I say.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So I would say that, Japan has a reason to build up an arsenal that is the same as the United States in order to deter them. Like, if Japan started building up a nuclear arsenal after they were nuked, I would not blame them.
But there's a difference between not blaming them and asserting your hegemony. Like, in other words, we work for our state. We don't work for their state. And we understand.
I don't work for my state to control the world. I don't believe that my state or that your state should control the entire world.
But you know that if we say we are only concerned with our security and our security stops at our borders, the Russians and the Chinese then get to take all of Eurasia. And now our security at our borders is super weak.
No, because you defend other sovereign nations. So you don't just allow them to take all of Eurasia. Obviously, that happens in steps. It doesn't happen all at once. We notice things occurring, and we take steps to remediate that when it occurs. But you don't take preemptive steps and just nuke people willy-nilly.
But preemption is what... So we can look at World War II. If we preemptively took out the Hitler regime, say in 36 or 37, maybe a couple million people would have died. But we waited for them to start the war on their terms once they built up their military capacity, and then 50 million people died. Likewise with North Korea, likewise with all these systems. The longer we wait, the bigger the marginal gains for them, and they will bury us with that attitude, Carl. What you're missing is that you have this idea that, well, we can coexist peacefully, but Putin and Xi and their acolytes, they want to dominate the world, and so we need to recognize that if we don't, they will. And
so I'm not suggesting that we take away our military. I'm not suggesting that we don't fight forces when, like, let's say they march into another sovereign nation in Eurasia, but I'm not for preemptively striking anyone with a nuclear weapon.
But, okay, let's say I told you, Carl, that there's a 50% chance that North Korea is going to keep up building nuclear weapons, and they will get to a point where you can't even do anything about it anymore because they'll just have too much that it'll offset any chance. And then there's a 50% chance over the next 50 years that they use those nuclear weapons against your country in an accident.
You're just saying this. There's not a 50% chance.
Why would you take the chance? No, but why each year you're taking the chance that this country could destroy you when we
could just I would rather take a chance that I may get nuked one day than nuke another country right now.
But nuking isn't the worst evil in the world. Letting these countries get a ton of nukes, because by this logic, we'd have to let Iran get nukes. Would you agree?
Yes.
Wait, you're okay with Iran getting nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I believe that any country who wants nuclear weapons should be allowed to get nuclear weapons.
Okay, I guess I'm a little bit surprised. I have read a few of your articles in the National Telegraph, and I will say, I've liked some of them. I read your piece that I saw just a couple days ago, or I think it was today actually, about one of the candidates that the Conservative Party had basically forbid from running just because of her religion, and I thought it was a pretty good piece. But a lot of the folks at the National Telegraph that I've been reading have been very warning about how dangerous Iran would be, because they could pass their nuclear weapons to proxies. They seek the destruction of Israel. But your view, I guess, is a little bit different. Your view is that they have a right to those nuclear weapons. I don't understand why terrorists have a right to nukes, but
I mean, they have as much of a right to a nuke as any other nation. I mean, if Pakistan, if Israel, if North Korea, China, India, Russia can have nuclear weapons, then why shouldn't any other nation get them as a deterrent from these nations? Like, I don't believe that there should be like a hegemony, especially. I mean, yeah, you can talk about the U.S., but you can also talk about the UN and their Security Council, which is made up of, the 5 largest empires that we've seen in modern day, right? And they're the ones who look to control the world by dividing it up between each other.
Well, I don't believe that the UN should even exist personally. I'm with John Bolton on the UN. I think
I'm with you on that one.
Good enough. Okay. I'm not like a liberal internationalist or anything. I would say the problem with Iran, though, is even if I give people the sovereignty argument, which I won't, the problem is they can then pass those nukes to their proxies, who will use it against Saudi Arabia or Israel, and we'll have a nuclear nightmare on our hands. In other words, when somebody tells me what they're going to do, I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt and believe them. Iran has been on the record for a long time telling their people that, we're going to turn Israel into a mushroom cloud, this sort of thing. They want to destroy the Jews. It is unconscionable to me to allow Iran to get nukes. I'll say this: my worry with
Israel has nukes, right? If there are credible reasons why, the state of Israel might be taken out by Iran when they get nukes, then they can deal with that and they can nuke Iran themselves.
But why should we have a huge nuclear exchange when we could take them out now before they get nukes and avoid nuking anybody altogether? Just have a conventional.
No, what I mean is that if there is a credible threat to the nation, then yeah, I mean we should take them out.
But there is a credible threat, though. Iran has attacked an Israeli oil tanker recently. They've been firing missiles at Saudi Arabia through their proxies in Yemen continually.
Yeah, that's not a sign that someone's going to use nuclear weapons. I mean, people haven't really used nuclear weapons since their development.
But Iran's a little bit different. They're on a zealous religious conquest, and I can't trust them, because my problem, Carl, is that you don't seem to be distinguishing between countries that are trustworthy and rational versus countries that are jihadist. And we can't accept a jihadist entity acquiring nuclear weapons.
Is Pakistan rational?
Pakistan getting nukes was a disaster, and Pakistan still has a very high chance at some point in the next 100 years of passing nukes along to terrorists. I can't trust them either. But Iran is even worse than Pakistan. Iran is more belligerent. When was the last time Pakistan attacked 3 countries in 1 week?
Well, Pakistan's ISI. I mean, they're like one of the largest funders of terrorists around the world.
They're not as zealous about nuking Israel as Iran is. Iran attacked an Israeli oil tanker.
Pakistan has a nice relationship with China. I mean, this is a case that is actually far more concerning than Iran.
I can't believe. Okay, but you're bringing up Pakistan and saying how bad it is that they've got nukes and how they work with China and how they could pass it to terrorists and stuff. Why do we want another Pakistan? Why not?
I don't like the fact that anyone has nukes. I believe that every nation who has nukes should be disarmed.
But you understand that's not going to happen. In other words,
I get why that would never happen.
You're probably not going to disarm.
No, I get that, but that would be obviously that would be a vision that I have, would be that it would be great if no one had nukes. I understand why that would likely never happen, but I mean, my idea is that it would be better if no one had nukes, but the fact that we allow some nations to have nukes, we should allow all nations to have them.
So it's like the Oprah meme of you get a nuke, everybody gets nukes, because that would be a recipe for still world wars. Just now everybody's got nukes, and now it's even deadlier. So I'm of the view I'm of the view here that it's better to take out a country before they get nukes to make the point to everybody else, don't even try, rather than wait for them to get a bunch of nukes and start the war on their terms.
I mean, we also have anti-nuclear capacities, right?
But why would you trust that? America's ground-based missile interception has a 40% accuracy rate, which means most are getting through. Israel's Iron Dome, for example, is not even capable of shooting down ICBMs or IRBMs. They're designed for slow-moving Katyushas from Hezbollah.
Isn't that the direction we should be moving in?
No, the direction that we should be moving in, yes, I agree.
That's defense, no?
No, anti-ballistic missile systems we should be doing research in, but we should couple that with preemptively taking out nuclear threats before they get nukes. That's my view. I don't understand this idea that we can tolerate Iran being able to, have a chance each year just nuking Israel if they feel like it, because they're not even deterred by death. They get to say to their God, look, we killed the Jews, Allah. Give us 72 virgins now. They're not rational. We can't have them having nukes. Like, even mutual destruction doesn't work if your opponent gets excited that they get to die.
Do you think all U.S. decisions are rational?
The U.S. is not Iran. The U.S. Look, I'm on Team USA. I'm not on Team Iran. I want the U.S. to rule the world hegemonically. I don't want Iran to rule the world hegemonically.
I don't agree with that.
But the world would be a better place
to rule the world.
So, Carl, where would you rather live? Would you rather be born in America or in Iran?
I'd rather be born in America.
Yes. So why shouldn't we perpetuate that throughout the world? Like, do Iranian people deserve to have the same opportunity that we were given, or do we say we value?
If they want it, if they show that they want it,
they do want it.
Americans had a revolution over it.
Yes, but they did in 2011, and they were stamped down and butchered by the regime. The regime
should back a revolution when it happens. We shouldn't nuke any nation.
Well, I'm not saying to nuke Iran. What I'm saying is take them out before the regime gets nukes. Because let me ask you this, Carl. Once they get nukes, you would agree it would be harder to take out the regime than before they get nukes, right? Mm-hmm. Just all else equal, economics equal, all else equal. So why not take them out before they get nukes? Because then it's too late if they turn out to be a huge threat. Like, maybe you're right, and it turns out that they just wanted those nukes as a deterrent, and they've got 8,000, but they never use them. And for the rest of time, we live in fear they might use them, but it turns out after 100,000 years, they never use them. Versus, how about we don't take that chance? And how about, 400,000 people died to take out the regime. Okay, I guess whoever was in charge gets blamed for that. Whereas, let's say they didn't do it, and now 10 million Israelis died. Oh, so did you save 9.6 million lives, or did you kill 400,000? Well, you did both.
You're speculating here.
But it's not speculation. They attacked 3 countries in 1 week, Carl. They attacked Saudi Arabia 7 times in 1 day. We've got the footage of it. We played it on the show recently. They attacked an Israeli oil tanker just last week, and additionally, they have been continually attacking U.S. service members in Iraq, and they killed a U.S. contractor in Erbil, for example. That's what Biden was responding to. This is a nation in Iran under a regime that's on the war path. They're at war everywhere in the Middle East to destabilize the region. They're at war in Syria. They're in Iraq. They're in Lebanon. They're in Yemen, and that's not even enough for them. They're attacking Saudi Arabia. They are, through their proxies, attacking Israel, and they are directly attacking the United States of America. To me, it's not speculation to say, they might continue that, and I probably don't trust them having a nuclear weapon. So what short of them actually launching it, Carl, would say maybe they'll actually use it against us? Because it seems like anything short of them actually launching it, you're going to say that's speculation.
No, I would say their aggression towards other nations justifies acts of war against them.
But war isn't the worst evil in the world. War happens, besides which war happens whether we want it or not. The war.
No. What I'm saying is that Iran currently has done enough to justify acts of war against them.
They have, or they haven't done enough?
They have.
So
if what you're saying, that they're aggressing on all these other nations, all these other sovereign nations, is correct, yes, then then yes, I would agree that they've justified acts of war against their own nation.
Okay, so you would actually then support a preemptive war against Iran then, or not even preemptive. At this point, it is retaliatory for all the strikes
Right.
that
If
they've done.
it's retaliatory, then I would support the war. Yeah.
But you don't, okay, you don't support preemptive wars to stop somebody before they get nukes, but you would support a retaliatory action. But, oh, okay, so South Korea's naval ship, I believe it was the Chang'an, was sunk back in 2010. Would South Korea and America be right to retaliate against North Korea for sinking a South Korean naval vessel?
Yes. Now, I would also I'd like to point out though that proportionality is a thing, right? Like in my belief. So I believe that we should react proportionately.
Why? Then your opponent can just cost benefit analysis. Like, let's say they know that you kill one if they kill one. Now they can calculate, oh, well, if we kill one, we'll get a big political show here, and then we only lose one. I'm of the view
so I don't mean
kill...
exactly equal, but I do mean just in good proportion, right? In good measure. Like we don't absolutely annihilate the nation based on, them sinking a naval ship.
I don't agree with that. I'm of the view personally, I believe in massive retaliation. So I'm not saying like somebody kills one of yours and you immediately nuke everything or whatever, but I am of the view, I don't subscribe to just war theory. I think it's largely like, maybe this is a bit crass. I think it's largely SJW type propaganda. At least that's how it was in my university. The people that tended to subscribe to it tended to be pretty far left, pretty kind of hippie-ish. I'm not saying you are or anything. I'm just saying that's my experience with it. I'm of the view that, and I would say very clearly in my administration, I would lay down doctrine right away. You kill one of ours, we killed 10,000 of yours, basically. That kind of logic, where it's greatly disproportionate. I don't believe in proportionality, and sometimes proportionality is impossible. Sometimes they use tech that you don't have. Like, I've had people argue that Israel's the bad guy because they respond with high tech when Hamas has low tech. It's like, what's Israel supposed to do? Go on the black market and buy some 1940s rockets that miss and probably kill civilians? It's like, no, they have high tech. Sure, it's disproportionate, but it should be disproportionate. That's what deterrence comes from. Russia, for example, has a massive retaliation doctrine. In other words, if America were to nuke Russia with one nuke, Russia has a doctrine where they would fire everything in America. Now, I don't like Russia.
Well, yeah, that's justifiable. That's the use of a nuclear weapon. Right, that's justifiable.
Okay, but Iran might use a nuclear weapon, though. This is the problem. Like, we can't.
They might, but they've. I mean, you can't just nuke someone because they might.
I'm not suggesting we nuke them. No. I'm suggesting we do a conventional war against them to take out the regime. I'm not. We don't have to.
I'm okay with certain actions. Like, if you want to start a war and take certain measures, then get started on some acts of war.
Okay, so.
I mean, America's already committing acts of war in most of the Middle East anyway. I mean, they're flying drones and dropping bombs in multiple nations. Right?
Against terrorists, not against the nations. So like.
But I mean, flying into another sovereign nation's airspace and bombing in that space would be an act of war. Like,
no, name one. But what if you have the permission of the government, though? The legitimate government. So Niger is an example of this. They're not in the Middle East, but people have said, Kyle Kulinski has said that America's at war in Niger. No, America's not at war with Niger. The Nigerian government begged America to come in and help them fight terrorists like Boko Haram and ISIS, and America went in and fought those terrorists. So America's not at war. That's not an act of war there against the state. That's an act of kinetic force against terrorists that we don't recognize as a sovereign entity. So I guess my question would be, which country in the Middle East is an example of this right now? Would you say Yemen, for example? Because I'm pretty sure the Hadi government supports America's assistance and Saudi Arabia's assistance to rid his country, his sovereign country, of the Iranian-backed Houthis, for example, right? Like, because you would agree that Hadi is the legitimate ruler of Yemen, right?
But I mean, I'm not saying they're unjustified acts of war. I'm saying that they're committing acts of war in numerous nations, right?
Okay, but what's wrong with that?
No, I'm just saying, like, I would be fine with them committing some acts of war in Iran as well.
Okay, yeah, I would say on the point of the intent, on the point of the signaling for why we can speculate that they might pass nukes along to terrorists, or they might go in that direction even from their own country, I would actually suggest reading. There were a couple articles in the National Telegraph by Daniel Boardman who talks about it. He highlights, he actually goes into a bit of detail and highlights Iranian domestic statements and contrast them against what they say to the world. To the world, they say, we just want nukes for defense, or we don't even want nukes. We just want peaceful energy, and we want the right to defend ourselves and stuff. And then to their own people, they say, this deal is awesome because it gives us a timeline so that we can nuke Israel, bro. So that's what they say in Farsi.
Iran's foreign minister came out and said that he believes there's some evidence to suggest that it was intentional, that the Ukrainian plane was shot down, which carried numerous Canadian citizens.
But that's the foreign minister, right? The foreign minister speaks.
Yeah, he was saying this in private, right?
No, but the foreign.
This is a leaked document from the foreign minister. He was saying that that it seemed intentional and that the government would never release the truth, right? But that it appeared as though the Ukrainian plane that was shot down by Iran was intentionally shot down. And that plane was carrying multiple Canadian citizens. So I would say that in that act, they've justified a war against themselves.
Okay. Well, so I do think, so in this case, we both agree that a war against Iran is justified. I do disagree on the theory of, you've got this metric of, or the set of morality based around justified war, just war. For me, it's about protecting my interests first and foremost and expanding my interests around the world. So it's a different set because I recognize that the West is the best and we should propagate ourselves everywhere. Not just because we're the best, but because if we don't, our enemies do, and then they'll bury us. So it's more about kill or be killed is kind of my view there. But additionally, that famous John Bolton line, I'd rather kill them over there than have them kill us over here, because our defense starts over there. And if it starts right here, then they're ending us here. That's
but if you're going over there preemptively, that's not defense, that's offense.
Okay. I'm an offensive realist, though. So I don't view offense like, to me, whether a country is defending.
But offense justifies defense on behalf of the other nation, does it not?
So for example, if we went in and took out North Korea, the North Korean regime, they're going to do everything that they can to defend their regime.
So if they were to nuke the United States, for example, because of that, like if they had, by the time you do this, if they develop the capacities to nuke, multiple U.S. cities, then you think, that's okay retaliation, and I'm okay taking the chance that occurs. In order to nuke them.
You try to shoot down as much as possible, obviously, and you try to hit. The reason why you strike first is that you try to hit what they've got on the ground before it gets in the air. Some get in the air, some get shot down halfway through. A couple might get through. Losing a couple targets now is better than losing your entire country in 20 years when they can just bury you, even if it's in an accident. So for me, you ask me right now, would you rather lose 100,000 a day or 5 million in 20 years? I take 100,000 a day, like anytime, right? So that's my view of it. It's about minimizing casualties in the long run, about saving lives, not to mention all the misery that would have been saved in North Korea, all those people that would have been born in gulags that now get to be born in South Korea, that has the whole peninsula at this point, and get to have an actual life instead of living under communism. So because for me, I look at it and I'm like, okay, war is hell, but so is communism. At least war is a temporary surgery against communism.
But a huge portion of the population in North Korea is part of the military. You would have to kill all of these people, essentially.
No, you wouldn't, because you didn't in Iraq. You just, in Iraq, you didn't have to. They had the fourth largest military. They were actually in the same position in 2003 that North Korea is today, the fourth largest military.
And Iraq now is made up of so many different types of militias and extremists.
Because of Iran. Like the most of the faults with how Iraq ended up are the fault of not taking out Iran in 2003. So I would have invaded Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq in the early 2000s, for example.
Bush was warned that there would be anti-U.S. insurgency increasing if he went to war with Iraq.
That's right, because of Iran, and I would have destroyed Iran. So that,
but if you were warned if you're warned of something of this sort, and then you go through with it, then aren't you somewhat responsible?
Well, he's somewhat responsible because he didn't take out the source of the insurgency, which was Iran. I would have invaded both countries at the same time.
So he's in large part responsible for the current situation in the Middle East.
Right? No, that's mostly Obama, actually, because Obama pulled out and created a power vacuum. He didn't stay the course of what Bush did. My contention with Bush is that he didn't do enough. He wasn't hawkish enough. He didn't take out Iran at the same time. Had he taken out Iran and Saddam at the same time, that insurgency wouldn't have manifested because the Ayatollah would have been dead and Iran would have been free. And all that funding and everything for terrorism from the Quds Force and the IRGC and everything, well, they wouldn't have existed anymore. So those countries both could have been democracies by now. And we should have had a neoconservative renaissance. And I think we can still do it. But it's going to take a lot of work. And part of that work is changing the culture. And that's what I aim to do here at Superpower Broadcasting, is change the culture around war and intervention and get us to be proud of ourselves. Not say, maybe we're the bad guy, or maybe they, maybe the devil's the good guy or whatever. Say, no, you know what? We're the best. We're the West, and we're going to make the world the West and forge the world in our image before our enemies enslave and conquer us. That's my that's my point. I don't understand this idea that we're just going to condemn millions of innocent people in Korea to potentially millions of years of communism, because there's no stopping that regime. Like you talked about a revolution. We know there can never be a revolution in North Korea. There was talks with the highest of the elites to potentially try to do the most unorganized possible coup that you could think of back in the 90s. And what did Kim do? He had all but one that managed to get out of the country, had them taken to the Ringrado Mayday Stadium and tied to stakes and burned before his regime and the audience. They were doused in kerosene and set ablaze. That's what happens if anybody ever has any talks of a rebellion in North Korea. They get doused in fuel and burned. So I don't understand this idea that, well, it's up to them to do a rebellion. It's impossible to do a rebellion there. They have the highest security state that Hitler and Stalin and Saddam never could have dreamed of. There's never going to be a domestic uprising there. There can't. If a son says he doesn't like Kim to his mom at family dinner, the mom goes to the secret police and has the son burned or murdered or sent to a gulag or whatever.
Right. I mean, so what's your solution for these people?
We invade the regime, and a lot of people will die, but so many millions of people will have.
Wouldn't these people who would sell out their own sons be willing to die for the regime when you have to kill them?
Wasn't that the case with Japan? Weren't they ready to die for the regime too? Which is true. No, because once you take out the regime and once you lay down the law and once you establish military rule over the country and martial law over the country, you might have a few true believers and stuff that come at you with like sticks or their AKs or whatever. You put them down, and then you begin a very long and arduous process of de-Juification of the country. And you have to start, because if we don't start now, then we might never get the opportunity. They might get too many nukes. And even if for some reason Kim and his daughter and her granddaughter and her granddaughter's grandson, for the rest of the time, if it turns out they never decide to nuke us in a fit of rage, even then, we still live in worry that whole time. And even then, all those tens of millions of people that will be born and die under communism for the next millions of years in North Korea, all of that misery and suffering and horror that would have been perpetrated, mothers having to be forced to watch their daughters raped in gulags by secret police, for example, all of that. We could have ended it in one swift war that might have had a couple 100,000 dead. To me, war is mercy. War is love, Carl. So, compared to communism. So
yeah, although you're killing a lot of people,
and we're saving millions, and not to mention,
ostensibly, you haven't. That's not demonstrable.
It's the price I'm willing to pay, and I am 100% committed to it. And I wish we had a resurgence of, unilateral-minded hawks, neoconservatives and whatnot, that would actually have the political will to see this through. Because right now, we are vastly infected with a tumor, with a cancer in our civilization, and that is relativism. And it's unconscionable to stand by as these regimes acquire the most dangerous weapons in human history to use against us. And to force their people into eternal submission, and that we have folks that were privileged enough to be born here that will say straight up, "Hey, look, you were born in the wrong sphere of influence. Tough luck, kid. I guess that's your fate in life." That's unconscionable to me. I'll take 100,000 dead to save millions any day, because it's not just about the here and now. It's about the next 10,000 years of everybody that will be born and died in Northern Korea that could have had the greatest prosperity we've ever known, but we'll have horror and have to watch their daughter get raped in front of them in a Korean gulag in 2,000 years because the Kims are still in power and still blackmailing people with nukes. Nukes are serious, and we can't let these regimes acquire the most deadly weapons against us. These are, as David Frum aptly put it, the axes of evil. They're not neutral. They're not good. They're not meh. They're evil, and we need to call evil what it is. So I mean, that's all I have to say to that. I mean, if you got any response, I mean, we can go into other subjects and stuff. It's just, I think at the end of the day, we do have a moral difference. We have a different framework. Like mine comes from a more, just in general, I guess, Western hegemonic, neoconservative, hawkish standpoint. Yours comes from the standpoint of what I would say is either defensive realism or just spheres of influence. And again, I would argue that even in your case where you're solely more or less concerned about, just defense, I would argue that waiting until your enemy is ready is actually going to hurt your defense, because even if you have more of a moral right to defend yourself in your case, I'm arguing to you, you might lose that war. Whereas what I'm offering you right now is a 100% chance of victory, even if it might be considered by some to be an immoral victory. Whereas you would say you're offering a 100% moral chance of defense. But I'm arguing to you, you might lose that war once China and Russia and North Korea are ready for it.
Right, but what I'm saying is that, I mean, China
ready. We should do it when we're ready, which is now.
Like currently, for example, if you look at China, China's actions justify war.
Okay. See, actually, in my case with China's a little bit trickier. I would support an economic embargo, basically, against them.
You wouldn't want to go into an all-out war because it'll lead to a world war.
Well, China's a little bit different again. I'm making the case here with China.
Oh no, I'm saying like you might not want to get into an all-out war with China, right?
Okay.
For obvious reasons. But that they've justified a war against themselves. Like it would, if we were to go to war,
yes,
it would be entirely justified.
But so has Russia. If America were to go to war with Russia right now, I would say it's 100% justified given everything that Russia has done. But am I calling for war with Russia? No, because they have 8,000 nukes. Like at the end of the day, power talks. We don't want North Korea to get to where Russia is so that we can make those arguments. The reason why I say that about Russia and not North Korea is that Russia has 8,000 nukes and North Korea has 100 nukes. I'm trying to stop them before they get there, right? So Russia, I guess my problem is I don't understand this idea that we're just going to tolerate these people sticking their thumbs at us and getting these vast amounts of nuclear weapons so that they can, at a minimum, even in the best case scenario, guarantee the ability to terrorize their population in perpetuity for the rest of time. And in worst case scenario, nuke us just any time in the blue for the next thousands of years. Anytime one of their dictators has a fit of rage. I can't trust them.
It's bad enough that Russia has about you, man. Like you don't get it. That's exactly what they think of you. Because I know. You have 8,000 nukes, and they're looking at you like this guy's probably going to blow us up at any point unless we get enough nukes to deter that.
I know Kim looks at John Bolton. He looks at me and says, "These guys would destroy me. I'd be scared of these guys." And you know what I say to that? I'd say, "Good, because if I'm in charge, you'd be barbecue, and I'm not. Barbecued." Ash doesn't have feelings,
but what I'm saying is the rhetoric that you're currently using, right, justifies what they're doing.
No, it doesn't. So my rhetoric that I'm saying,
your rhetoric justifies expanding the nuclear arsenal. Yes, it does.
No. But okay, but I'm not on his side. I've said before, this is the problem. I've said before that I can see why he does. I can see why people like John Bolton and me make him scared. I want him to be scared. He's my enemy. Can you understand that he's my enemy and I want him dead? That I'm not in the business of looking out for communist despots.
Yeah, but my point is that he's not necessarily going to use his nuclear arsenal that he's building up, because you're saying, well, he's building up a nuclear arsenal, which shows that he might use it. Well, no, he's building up a nuclear arsenal because his enemies, as you say,
well, that's what he says,
have a giant nuclear arsenal. If your
That's what he
enemies
says
have a
is the
giant nuclear
justification.
arsenal, why wouldn't
No,
you?
no.
What if the situation were reversed? What if North Korea had 8,000 nukes and the US had a few hundred?
I would be freaking terrified, and they would
Right.
probably win. But America's the good guys. North Korea's not. You can understand that America is
But
more.
they're only the good guys
superior.
because they don't nuke North Korea.
No.
Like if you
because
nuke
they have
North
human
Korea, you no
rights.
longer have the. You
No.
can no longer say you're the good guy.
No. If America nuked North Korea tomorrow, America would still be the good guys because in America, you can go to the park with your kids and you can go home the next day and not get taken to a gulag in the night and raped by the secret police. You
right,
can't
but
do that in North
they are willing
Korea.
to murder and subjugate people all around the world to things that they wouldn't want for their own citizens.
Dictators. Subjugate communist regimes. This is
No,
about
I mean they do it to
liberation.
regular people as well.
What, you're talking collateral damage? America doesn't intentionally kill innocent people. North Korea does. This idea that if America were to take out the regime, that America can't call herself a good guy anymore. No. Your argument is that you're the good guy if you're defending yourself and you're the bad guy if you're the attacker. No, my argument is you're the good guy if you have liberal democracy and human rights, and you're the bad guy if you're a communist. And so whether North Korea is attacking or defending doesn't matter because they're evil, because they're communists, and whether America is attacking or defending doesn't matter. No, but that's the problem. You're a relativist. Douglas Murray warned about people like you. Bill Kristol has warned about people like you that your line of
obviously
thinking,
because they want to spread their American hegemony, right? That's why they would warn against I'm against American hegemony. I don't believe that America should be ruling the world.
No. Yes, I want America. I want American hegemony the world over. To me, it is.
I want the world to be ruled by the people themselves. And if the people don't want to live the way Americans want to live, then America can fuck right off.
So, Carl, you understand what you're doing right now is dictator apologetics because you think the people of Iran who.
No, I would never say that.
Were butchered by the regime. They don't want to live under the regime, but they don't have the means to rise up against the regime.
They want to live under an American regime. Is that correct? Have they shown signs of that?
The Shah, man. They prefer the Shah. Even if we weren't talking about democracy, a Western dictator is better than an anti-Western dictator. They have a higher standard of living. Look at Pinochet. You ask me, who would people rather live under, Pinochet or Castro? They're both dictators. People are rich under Pinochet. People are starving under Castro. I'll take Pinochet any day. You don't understand why Pinochet is better than Castro? Or are they just both states with state interests? Because it's not about whether you're the attacker or defender. It's about, are you good? Are you good?
Obviously, some states are better than other states. Yeah, sure. But I don't think that a state that I believe is bad needs to be wiped off the map. Like, I don't believe that that's the case. For every state where I may disagree with their ideology. Like, just because I disagree with the ideology within that state doesn't mean that I have the right to go in and change their ideology.
What if their ideology means one guy gets to have a pleasure squad of 1,000 women that he sexually enslaves and gets to lord over and abuse and brutalize a country of 25 million forever, and his kids get to do it, and then their kids get to do it forever? And our ideology is people have freedom and liberty. Would you say, well, they're both ideologies, and if we're not attacking each other, let be, like John Lennon said, live and let live, or whatever?
No, but I mean, what I would do is I would wait for there to be a force within their nation that expresses a desire for what we're offering.
But there can't, because the second there's even the whispers of it, they get taken to the back and doused in kerosene and lit ablaze, Carl. They don't have the capacity for it. It's like,
then do it. Like, if you want to get something done, like you said, if you want to get rid of a regime, okay, you're okay with a few 100,000 people dying.
Yes.
But why shouldn't those 100,000 people be the ones making the choice instead of you?
That's not how politics.
I believe that international relations work. This is the rule of the law. Once they show that they're willing to die for their cause, we will jump in.
No, but what you don't understand is those people are an unfortunate sacrifice in the cause of infinitely greater liberation.
But I don't
intergenerational.
We get to make the decision to sacrifice other people's lives that we have no connection to and aren't even part of our state.
What do you mean? America has 8,000 nukes. America could do it immediately. What are you talking?
They can do whatever the hell they want, right? Because they have 8,000 nukes. That's not a good thing.
No, it is a good thing. I'm glad the good guys have that. I don't want the bad guys to have that. It's bad enough Russia has it.
But America's not, by definition, always the good guy. They are the bad guy in some cases.
America is. Every American intervention ever has been justified. America is the vanguard of liberty.
That's absolutely
America is an exceptional nation. America is good. America is intrinsically good. America is virtuous. America is the shining city on the hill. America is the savior of the world. America,
that's a joke.
To have the capacity to intervene and to
they're an imperialist power like any other. Just to admit it.
Where's America's colonies? Name one.
You want to push American hegemony, even though they're not colonies by name.
Not an empire. How is liberating people and giving them self-determination, like in Iraq or like in Japan or like in Germany? How is that an empire? Would you describe Japan as a colony of America? Because
no,
America
not currently.
So then where are America's colonies? Would you describe Iraq as a colony?
America attempts to install people in all sorts of Middle Eastern nations. As you said, Saudi Arabia is run by a population of small group who doesn't represent their nation at all.
Wait, where?
If Saudi Arabia.
Wait, no. The Saudi royals are our friends. You understand that
the Saudi royals don't represent their people very well.
So, their people right now have largely been brainwashed by ISIS as sympathizing Wahhabi clerics. You understand that MBS is a bit more liberal than the Wahhabis, right?
Right. So you're suggesting that we install a regime that the people don't agree with because they're friendly with us, and you think that that's a good thing. How is that not empire building?
Well, Saudi Arabia is a sovereign country, though. How are they a colony of America?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so they're a sovereign country by technicality.
No, but they're literally a sovereign country. Like, I recognize the sovereignty of Saudi Arabia. I'm not arguing to go into Saudi Arabia. People say to me, why don't you support bombing Saudi Arabia or whatever? I'm not arguing. I've never advocated for a war against Saudi Arabia, even though they do human rights abuses.
Why not?
Jeane Kirkpatrick doctrine.
Why aren't you against Saudi Arabia?
It is.
Saudi Arabia has just as bad protections for their people as the states that surround it.
No.
Yes,
Saudi Arabian people, it's a dictatorship, but let's keep it real. Yeah. They're relatively well off. Very few are ever butchered by the regime. Whereas in Iran, 1,500 will just be whole-scale slaughtered, and they're poor, and they're always sent off to die for regime wars across the Middle East and everything. Saudi Arabia minds its own business. Saudi Arabia...
Right, so we're funding a regime, though, where the people don't want that regime in place.
No, but that's not true. The radical Wahhabist clerics don't like it because they see it as decadent. Those people
the majority of the population doesn't want
they've been
the regime in place.
By the Wahhabist clerics.
That's you're saying, but who's brainwashing? America engages in propaganda wars as well.
Good. I'm trying to do propaganda.
So you do brainwash people on your side. You're trying to brainwash people to your side. So why wouldn't they do the same? Is propaganda? Is use of propaganda automatically mean that your people have been brainwashed?
Whose side are you on, Carl? You don't recognize that
I'm on the side of the people of every nation of the world.
Even if they want to nuke you, even if they want to threaten you, even if they want to attack you, even if they want to, even if they have a system in which they can't even express their own solidarity or their own sovereignty because, or their own self-determination because they have a regime that will butcher and send them to the death camps. I don't understand this, Carl. My problem is, you asked me, why would I support Saudi Arabia? I would encourage you to look into the work of Jeane Kirkpatrick. Jeane Kirkpatrick made the case for why we should support Pinochet, the Contras, Saudi Arabia, the Shah, etc. Because a pro-Western dictator is somebody who works with you, helps you, and you have leverage over so they can reform slowly, and you don't have to go to war with them. An anti-Western dictator is somebody that wants to kill you and your kids.
But Saudi Arabia has actually fomented a lot of hate towards the West because the West is the largest force there.
No. How? Where has the Saudi royals ever talked ill about America?
Oh, no. I'm not saying that they would speak ill about America publicly ever. I'm saying that, behind the scenes, I'm saying that they fund certain projects and that their simple existence.
No.
Their simple existence.
Name one project that the House of Saud has funded that is anti-American interest.
They're propagating a war in Yemen.
No. That's the Houthis. Look into Daniel Boardman's work. He's also at the same paper that you write for. Look into Daniel Boardman's work. He's covered this extensively. The Houthis are the insurrectionaries. The Houthis are the ones that Iran funded.
Right, but what I'm saying is that they're propagating anti-insurrectionist feelings towards Western powers by doing these things.
The sovereignty of the government of Yemen that was overthrown by Iran doing a regime change war and funding the Houthis to come into the country, gave them guns so that they could take down the sovereign government. In other words, why does sovereignty only matter if it's an anti-Western government? Why don't we have sovereignty? Why doesn't Hadi have sovereignty? Why doesn't Saudi Arabia have sovereignty? Why is it only Iran and North Korea and Russia and all these anti-American countries? Why do they get sovereignty?
No, we all have sovereignty.
But you're only defending you're saying that Saudi Arabia is waging a war in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is defending the legitimate government in Yemen that was invaded and aggressed upon by Iran. Would you agree with that? They've given over $1 billion of food aid to alleviate suffering from starvation that the Houthis have inflicted in the country. Like, Saudi Arabia is the defensive actor there. The Yemeni government, but the Yemeni government begged them to come in and help them. So, like, let's say hypothetically, let's just say, because you want to talk about defense and everything, let's say right now that Russia invaded Canada, but then Canada begged President Biden for help, and then Biden came in and helped Canada repel Russia. Would you say that America had a right to help out Canada?
But you're the one who argues against relativism, right? So isn't Yemen different? How is the Yemen? How do you trust the Yemeni government?
Wait, no. But Hadi was a pro-Western leader. Hadi,
just because he's pro-Western doesn't mean he's legitimate as a leader.
It means he's he's on our side. Why would we tick off people that want to help us? What message does that sound anybody know?
Their people. Okay, and they get taken out, regardless of if those people are pro-Western or anti-Western. If they get taken out by a revolution, I think that's a good thing.
So you think that Iran doing basically a regime change war in Yemen that was anti-our interests, anti-Western interests, was good? No, because that sounded kind of like what you just said. You said you thought it was a good thing. I just want to get you on the record because
what I'm saying is that if Iran is backing a population of people that is significant in Yemen, that's fine.
But they're not significant. They're a few radical Shiite puppets of Iran, and they're backing them, and they're lording over the country, and they've been starving millions. And Saudi Arabia is the one sending billions of dollars to help people not starve to death, and Iran is sending billions of dollars to give these terrorists more guns. So
I don't believe that.
But I can get you sources. What do you mean you don't believe it?
Sources
today? Like, are your
sources
today? What?
No, as I've said
before,
like
right now, the King Salman,
Russia and NATO have shown themselves to provide propaganda when asked.
So you don't believe that Saudi Arabia has given over $1 billion in food aid, right? Because I can get you the numbers right now. I can literally get the King Salman humanitarian aid and relief center has donated over $1 billion since the war started in Yemen. So how much has Iran given it to alleviate suffering in Yemen? Nothing. All their money.
What's the source? Like who's suggesting
that they've given this humanitarian aid and relief center? They've given over $1 billion to food. They pledged $40 billion last month, Carl. How you're saying they're waging a war? No. They're trying to root out these invaders essentially from these Iranians.
But they are invaders.
No, but this is an Iranian-managed regime change war against Hadi. Saudi Arabia has given over $1 billion. Saudi Arabia, look. I'm not going to say that Saudi Arabia hasn't done things domestically that I would disagree with and say are bad, but they're not trying to hurt us. They're actually trying to help us on oil against Russia and against Iran. They're trying to help us militarily against Iran. But even if I just care about who's defending,
So
and
this
who,
is no, but this is what you're saying. So you don't care about the people of these nations. You pretend to care about the people of these nations, but you don't, because the second it serves your interest, you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. The guy serves my interest.
You don't think that the people of Yemen were better off before they were starving under Hadi versus starving under the Houthis? You don't see the people of Yemen as being better off under Hadi, the legitimate government, the government that represented them.
What makes them legitimate?
What do you mean?
What makes them legitimate?
What makes the Houthis legitimate? The Houthis are a bunch of terrorists.
Right. But can't the same be said for the regime that's currently in power?
Well, the Houthis control a large portion of the country now, unfortunately, and they're terrorizing the population to submission. If you mean Hadi, was Hadi a terrorist? How was Hadi a terrorist?
Well, I'm just saying, was his control over the nation legitimate?
What?
Was his control over Yemen legitimate?
Absolutely.
Like, if the people don't want him there, does that make him illegitimate?
But just because Iran went in and fomented an insurrection with some radical Shiites that don't represent Yemen, what do you mean? Like, how are they representative of the people of Yemen? How are the Houthis representative of the people of Yemen? The people of Yemen,
because they are people of Yemen,
out in hunger, and the King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Refuge Center, a relief center rather, has contributed over $1 billion to keeping them alive. Saudi Arabia is our friend, man. Iran is our enemy.
Yeah, I don't agree.
No, but you're on the side of the enemy, straight up. You are at this point carrying water.
No, I'm on no one's side.
Work,
I'm on neither person's side.
Okay, but neutrality.
I don't believe that.
Neutrality in the face of evil is too close to evil for comfort. That's the problem.
Yeah, I would say that the U.S.'s actions are also actions of evil in many cases.
How? Name one.
Because installing pro-Western regimes in other nations and forcing your hegemony on the rest of the world is evil.
But you don't believe that if America didn't do it, that Russia and China would do it? Like, you know that they would do it if America didn't do it, right?
Okay, that's why we hold deterrence.
But it's not just about us here. And even if it was just about us here, how does letting them take over the world?
Obviously, you help defend other nations.
But you don't. They're attacking Yemen right now, and you don't want to help the Hadi's government. So let's say they did this in Georgia or in Estonia. You wouldn't want to help the government there because you'd say, hey, look, the Russians went in and they said, hey, look, we had 3 people that were ethnically Russian, so now we represent the people. You'd be saying that Russia represented the Estonian people if they invaded them, because you're doing it right now with Yemen. Iran and the Houthis do not represent the people of Yemen. Hadi represented the people of Yemen. And he was overthrown by a bunch of insurrectionary, seditious enemies of the world order, of civility, of our civilization. And you carry water for them. So I don't believe, Carl, that you would actually defend those countries if it came to be.
Like, there's no...
They're not defending Yemen right now. Yemen was aggressed upon by Iran.
But Hadi was installed, right?
What?
Hadi was installed.
Hadi is the legitimate leader of Yemen.
And who put him there?
Humanitarian conditions under Hadi compared to the Houthis are night and day. The people are starving under the Houthis. The people were, to the extent that it's Yemen, they were not necessarily prosperous, but they were as prosperous as they could be under Hadi. They were relatively happy. And it was Iran. It was Iran that fomented the insurrection.
The people in Yemen were already suffering prior to the war.
Some aggrieved upon radical Shiites that are sympathetic towards the Ayatollah were not happy under Hadi. Why are we taking their side? Why are we taking
what I'm saying is we shouldn't be subjugating people. Whether they agree with us or not, we shouldn't be subjugating the people. Like you say with Iran, there are people in Iran who you say, well, they're trying to put together a group, but they're constantly subjugated by the state in Iran. Well, why don't you believe that Western states do the same to people?
What do you mean do the same to people? So Chile would be an example of this. Did Pinochet subjugate the people of Chile? Yes. Was he better than the alternative? Absolutely. And look at Chile today. Chile is the richest country in Latin America. Imagine a Soviet puppet dictator, or somebody like Alon who would have sold them out to the Soviets had come in there, or Allende, I guess is how he's pronounced. Let's say he was in charge, and Chile went the Soviet direction. The people would have been not necessarily starving, but they would have been like how Cuba is today. And so my posit to you, Carl, is, if we don't do it, our enemies do it, and when our enemies do it, conditions are worse. And so, given that, what we need to say is not be mad that somebody's going to be the world police, because if we don't do it, they'll do it. But say, who's going to be the best for the world? Will it be China, Russia, or America? And I think
nobody has to be in charge.
No, but the international system is anarchic. It is a power vacuum, and those with power and might will fill that vacuum regardless of morality.
But we can deter each other. There are multiple powerful actors in this system.
But you don't want to even
have opposing viewpoints.
But you're saying right now that, like, in a hypothetical world where we just stop being world police, and then the enemies like Russia and China start making ground because we created a power vacuum, you're saying, but we can defend our allies. My problem to you, though, Carl, my question is, in the world right now, Iran has attacked one of our allies, that's the Hadi government, and you don't want to defend them. You're siding with Iran.
No, I already told you. I already told you that I would justify a war in Iran. I don't
know that if Russia didn't do the exact same thing in Estonia, you wouldn't say, well, the Estonian people want to live under the Russian heel.
No, I already told you that acts of war against Iran are justified.
So you don't see, but you don't see what Iran has done in Yemen as being an act of war, basically, against Yemen. You don't see that. You don't see them firing off.
I would say we attack Iran for what they're doing.
Okay, so this is the weird thing, is I believe an area of agreement that we have tonight is that we would both be in favor of a war against Iran tomorrow. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I suggested that. I mean, they've killed as I said, they've killed multiple Canadian citizens on a plane, and the foreign minister suggested that that's likely to be intentional. That's an act of war right there.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to go to an intermission to get more water and everything. We're welcome to continue this, but I'm not sure though that on Iran we necessarily have the biggest disagreement. Though I do find your making apologetics for their regime change war in Yemen to be problematic, I would say. But I think, though, the big difference that we've had tonight is more around morals than it is about a specific course of action here, because the common ground that we've reached is that you can admit that retaliation against Iran is justified. So I guess we agree that you have a right to retaliate. I just go further and say, you have a right to nip things in the bud before millions are dying as a result of, a big exchange. I'd rather have a small direct thing now than wait for a war on their terms later. That's my view. But I think one difference between us would be that you don't view war as inevitable. I view war with Iran and North Korea as inevitable. And so I'm trying to minimize casualties. You're trying to get world peace and stability. I don't believe that a multipolar world can ever be stable. I believe that the world is anarchic and will always cluster around one superpower, one one hegemon. Right now, it's been America. If America gives that up, Russia and China would kill to take that. I believe that would be foolish for any empire or any hegemonic entity to give up their hegemony unilaterally or willingly. I don't really think that's happened throughout history. Usually empires and stuff have given up that power because they didn't have a choice for whatever reason. I think America would be stupid to give up that position personally. It would be ill-advised. I want America to stay the top dog, and I'm doing my best here to advocate for cultural changes that will lead to America and the West at large not only retaining our top dog position, but expanding our lead in the world and expanding our hegemony and consolidating it in the world. But that's my view. I don't think there's necessarily that much else we can necessarily go over, unless there's anything else you want to get to. But it has been 2 hours, so I do have to be up early. But I don't want to keep you up anyway. Like, I appreciate you coming on because I appreciate an exchange of ideas. And I will say this. You're definitely, one of the the better opponents that I've had to debate, one of the more formidable opponents I've had to debate. We've had a few people on recently that just, even their own side was like, ooh, they didn't do a good job or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think people on your side would say you did a decent job of making your case, though. So, which is a little bit of a change of pace. And I would say you're welcome to debate on other topics or even similar topics at some point in the future. But if you got any closing statements, feel free. So
yeah, I would just in the same vein as yours, I would just close with saying that basically my view of conflict is retaliatory, of course. So in terms of Iran, they would have justified that action. I don't believe in preemptive strikes, but I do believe in bolstering liberal democracy all over the world. And so if there's some sort of revolution in a specific nation and it happens to fall within the parameters of what we consider a good liberal democracy, then I would say we back that revolution and we don't back maybe these more tyrannical revolutions that do occur against certain democratic institutions that are installed around the world, right? So we fight the game over time that way and try to get most of the world on our side. But I just believe that keeping peace and, just not murdering our fellow citizens in other nations is a better way to keep them on our side and building those nations for us.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my personal view of military interventionism. I would love to come back on and debate some other topics with you because this was an interesting discussion. Anyway.
Wyatt's in the chat saying, have you on to talk about Carbone? I did see that Carbone, because Carbone's a joke, right? Like he's football. I mean, I read a couple of the articles and everything about him. I'd be interested in talking about Carbone, for example, because like I said, I've read a few of your articles and I liked generally what you had to say. It's just on this particular issue, we obviously have a fair bit of disagreement. Right. In terms of my sort of closing, what I would say is, I think it's clear in my sort of view here that it is apparent that the world is anarchic, that there's a power vacuum at large. There is no world government. And so in that sort of chaos, powers will try to fill the void. And that if we don't do it, our opponents will do it. And then if America doesn't act as the police of the world to defend those that are crying out for aid, Russia or China will do it, and they will intervene to prop up their client despots. And I do believe that you do have to work with some unsavory actors, that there are lesser evils and greater evils in the world, that Pinochet was a lesser evil compared to Castro or Allende, that the Shah was a lesser evil compared to, say, the Ayatollah. And that's my view of it. I would say additionally that there are cases for sure when it becomes impossible, when the technology is such that, and the power is such consolidated that it becomes impossible for people to ever materialize any cohesive rebellion, that it's incumbent upon us then to be an external force to do what cannot ever occur within the country, such as in the case of North Korea, and in cases where it can occur, to stand in solidarity with the people, such as in Iran or in Syria, so that they can have national self-determination instead of being trapped under the yoke of the Ayatollah or of Assad. But like I said, I'd be happy to, have further debate or talk about Carbone at some point, because sometimes like Wyatt will come on or Daniel will come on, And I got to say, I do generally like the work that you guys are doing at the National Telegraph, writing papers and everything. And, I know you've contributed, towards the paper. Wyatt's contributed articles that I've seen as well. Oh, yeah. I think it's good. I've got a lot of issues with Aaron O'Toole, for example. I think that basically Trudeau with a blue tie, weak on China. Basically apologetic towards the Muslim Brotherhood, which is incredible. That our Overton window in Canada is so far, I guess, left that's just the norm, And I think that, not just you guys, but other people that write for that paper too. There are a lot of smart people at that paper, as far as Canadian publications go, it's really one of the only ones that I can actually take seriously at this point. So that's all.
Yeah, a lot of the Canadian publications have been bought by our government at this point, right? So it's the same narrative coming out everywhere.
Yeah, they're like state media. Like the state, I basically at this point consider the CBC to be the media wing of the Liberal Party.
Well, even the non-state media receives funding from the government anyway. So they just that essentially makes them state media, doesn't it? Like if a large part of your personal funding is coming from the state, I would suggest that you're state media.
No, I would agree with that. I would agree.
And I mean, if there's one side of the equation that's saying, hey, if we get in power, we'll defund you, and then the other guy's saying, we'll keep you going, then obviously whose side the media is going to be on, right?
Well, that's true. Money talks. So
yeah. So yeah, I'd love to come back on. We can talk about Carbone. I have a whole series on him. He's responded to a few things, and like this guy's just a farce, right? Like, I mean, he's shown himself to be, nothing more than just a show, right? Like his candidacy is not going anywhere. So.
It's so superficial. It's so superficial. I mean, people talked about people said that like Trump was like fake or whatever and whatnot. Yet Trump would actually have an address. He'd actually have a tower or whatever. This guy, he doesn't have anything.
No,
I mean, is he homeless? Is he actually homeless? Like
he presents strange bonds. This man, he started a party in 2018 called the Progressive Party. And then he came back in 2019 and renamed it the Republican Party.
He went from progressive to Republican.
Yeah,
what a grifter!
And his policies are like universal daycare, universal tuition. He wants 24-hour security at ATMs all around the country. He wants to vaccinate all pets. These are some weird policies.
It's weird,
especially for a Republican Party. And he photoshops himself with photos of Trump. He currently put out a Make Canada Great Again hat. Yes. He's charging $80 for it.
No, but see, that's the thing. Trump charged, I think, $20 for the
because a real rich guy knows that you make the hats cheap, and that's publicity, right?
And then you maximize revenue by maximizing sales. This guy, who the hell is going to fork out $80? Like, look, I like Jeb Bush.
And nobody knows who this guy is. Like, people knew who Trump was, at least.
But Jeb Bush, when he was running, he had this campaign shop, and you could spend, I think it was $50 American on a guaca bowl. Nobody bought that. That was stupid. If you made it $5, maybe somebody would have bought a Jeb branded guaca bowl. Nobody was buying that. At some point, I mean, just the absurdity of it all. Like, the guy's basically, in some ways, a socialist. In other ways, a wannabe populist, and in other ways, a nobody, which is super funny about it. He's like an internet edgelord almost,
Yeah, it's exactly it. Like, if you go to his business site, you'll see that he puts up billionaires only right at the top.
No, dude. No. Even Trump, because Trump's thing was like, I'm a billionaire and I can make the economy. He didn't do anything like billionaires only.
Quote, billionaires only at the top of his site.
But you can't do populism if you're going to do over the top.
Billionaires only, yeah.
Like, you have to pick one. You can't.
You can be I'm a good businessman and I'm rich and I'll help you out.
Yeah.
But you can't be like, billionaires only, man. So there's only a couple thousand people in the world who can join you now?
Yeah, that's amazing. Because there are populists that'll run and they'll be wealthy, but they'll usually tell it from the position of, hey, look, I'm using my wealth to help you. Not, oh man, look at how elite I am and you can't join my club. Wait, how are you going to get elected? Goofball. Anyway, no, I think it's good we wrapped up on a high note.
There's
a lot of stuff that we would probably agree on when it comes to Canadian politics, and I think we both despise Trudeau. So there's 100%. That. So I know a lot of people see this and it got pretty heated and stuff, but at the end of the day, we have a lot more in common than a lot of the people at the CBC and stuff out there that are gonna just carry water for Trudeau ad nauseum and whatnot, and have no real backbone for anything, and the grifter sort of establishment, and that's one thing. I don't think anybody could accuse you of being a grifter. You seem to be genuinely passionate about your values, so
I'm not shilling for anything, right? I'm trying to represent myself as best I can, and I had fun, and it's good to wrap up on a good note. Like you said, there's a lot of agreement here. I specifically chose military interventionism because I knew that was something that we'd have some disagreement on, and I knew it would make it fun, right? This is a great way to wrap it up. So thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, no. So hopefully there's no hard feelings or anything there. We just have a really different sort of I guess worldview when it comes to intervention. But again, of course,
Yeah.
if we were going to debate on something, it would be, of course, the things we disagree on, right? So that's what people are seeing. They hate each other or whatever. It's like, no, like
you don't want two people coming on and just agreeing for a couple hours.
That would be boring. It'd be like the Dave Rubin meme. Like, I agree with that. It's like, okay, whatever. But
yeah.
Like,
all right, cool. So that's the show, right? But yeah, this was actually a lot more fun. So
I think people were entertained tonight. So
neither of us are leftists. So I mean, getting beat or like getting into a bit of an argument, it doesn't ruin anything here. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And it's been good to talk with you and everything. And hopefully we can do this again and dunk on, brainlet like Carbone. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm 100% in for something like that.
And I look forward to reading more of your stuff with if you keep, sending stuff to the National Telegraph and everything. Mm-hmm. So with that, thanks for coming on. And if you could just let the people know where they can follow you. I believe I put in the description a link so that people could subscribe to your channel because you do YouTube.
Yeah, I'm on YouTube. We have obviously we're on all the alternate platforms too because YouTube has given us some strikes. So we're also on Library and BitChute and Rumble and all this stuff. So
smart.
But it's Chance of Flurry. You can find us pretty much anywhere on all the social platforms. You can follow us at KP Flurry. That's just my initials. So yeah, just check us out if you want, maybe a bit more of a libertarian take when it comes to military interventionism. But like we said, most other things we're probably in agreement on. So I'd say probably to a decent extent on economics when it comes to Canadian politics and everything too. It's that's the thing about Canada is our political spectrum is shifted so far left that it's you really do need to work together because when you're going up against somebody who's got basically state media and like you said, not just the CBC, but a lot of these adjacent networks that get partial funding. How do you compete with that, really? I mean, there's a reason why people say they're the natural governing party of Canada. How much of that is organic versus how much of that is, well, they control the narrative, right? Yeah.
So, there's definitely that. So, but it's been good to talk with you and everything. And have a good night. I know it's late where you are, and it's late where I am.
Yeah, man.
Yes,
fast forward.
Appreciate you making the time to come on because I have a pretty late schedule usually. So, have a good night, Carl.
No, man, this is a great conversation. Have a good night yourself.
Thank you.
Talk later.
Peace. So is Carl. And so, I don't actually really think I'm not going to do a post. Well, I'll do a little bit of a post show just to kind of go over my sort of thoughts and everything. It'll be pretty short. That's the debate. Thank you to everybody for watching. And you can tune in a few minutes, and I'll just kind of go over how I think I did and everything. And we'll probably have Carl on hopefully again in the near future to talk about this Carbone guy because especially most of my audience lives in the United States. If you haven't looked into Carbone is one of the most wacky people in politics anywhere in North America. I mean, he makes some of the people in the Green Party even look sane and normal. That's how much of a goofball Carbone is. So I'll see you all in a few minutes. So talk to you in a bit.